morning, everybody. Distinguished guests, discussants, development partners, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. Thank you for joining us this morning for the launch of the 24th edition of the Uganda Economic Update, which is the World Bank's flagship publication on economic matters and high priority issues facing the country. We often refer to it as the UEU, so you'll hear the term UEU being referred to by many of us over the course of the morning. So welcome and good morning. As many of you know, the UEU is a biannual publication, so 24th, and we'll have a second one in every year. The biannual publication of the World Bank that highlights Uganda's recent economic developments and also focuses on economic performance, identifies emerging challenges and opportunities that face the nation. The aim of these updates is to inform policymakers, stakeholders, and the public, and to stimulate debate around topical issues by combining country-specific issues and analysis with our experiences from working in countries around the world. Recent editions have explored the need for increased spending on human capital investments, particularly in health and education, to enable the transition towards a sustainable growth model. This latest edition, therefore, builds further on the human capital theme by shining the spotlight on the importance of investing in early childhood development, essential for the transformation of human capital in Uganda. Let me share some brief highlights. A soundbite from the presentations that'll come forward with my colleagues presenting later this morning, Silva and Eleanor. We'll focus on Uganda's economy as a growing and thriving one that continues to strengthen. However, despite this trend, that in the medium term, growth trajectory will be highly vulnerable to various downside risks, including delays in oil production and climate-related shocks as well. To sustain the resilience and achieve inclusive growth, Uganda needs to enhance its fiscal space and to improve the quality of its fiscal consolidation. Secondly, Uganda has a young and growing population, and in order to harness the country's demographic dividend, significant effort will be needed to invest in early years to ensure that children receive essential nutrition, health care, and a quality education. These are all essential ingredients to become healthy, skilled, and productive adults. Ladies and gentlemen, the case for investing early is strong because most physical brain development takes place during the first 1,000 days of a child's life, which is why adequate nutrition, care, and stimulation is critical during this time. Indeed, investing in human capital early in the life cycle is more effective than attempting to make up for lost ground later. And yet, at the moment, Uganda's spending on both health and education is below the recommended international benchmarks and below that of regional peers. In education, Uganda spent 2.7% of GDP in 2021, compared to the regional and the recommended benchmark of 4% and the regional average of 4.2%. Similarly, in health, Uganda spent 1% of GDP in 2021, compared to the average of regional peers at 2%. So to achieve ambitious development goals outlined in Vision 2040, in NDP 4, and the tenfold strategy, Uganda will need to invest more in human capital. And I think it's important that these documents all reflect the importance of human capital. This report therefore outlines the strategic investment priorities that can catalyze human capital accumulation, drawing on international evidence and the successful experiences of peer countries. These priorities include expanding access to affordable childcare and primary healthcare services in underserved areas in particular, scaling up successful parenting and violence prevention programs, and financing 1 year of pre-primary education. So you'll hear more about this as we move along with the agenda. So let me stop here and say that I look forward to an engaging discussion with you this morning. And just to remind you that the World Bank has been in Uganda for more than 60 years, and we're here to stay. So we assure you that we are presenting the findings knowing that we will be here to support the country and work with partners to move this agenda forward. So thank you very much, and let me take this opportunity as guided by the moderator to invite my division director, Chimiao Fan, to open this event. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mukami and Robert. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the launch of this 24th edition of the World Bank's Uganda Economic Update. Mukami has already given you quite a bit of the highlights, particularly on the special focus on early childhood development. Let me, for those, obviously, most of you have not had a chance to read it, so to save you some time, let me perhaps give you some highlights of the report. I think there's 3 messages on the recent economic development that I wanted to give you. First is really that I think Uganda's economy continues to strengthen with low inflation and favorable agriculture production. I hope your coffee output was also good, and the strong industrial and services activities. Obviously, the report uses high-frequency data, and that high-frequency data indicates that sustained expansion, which is very much driven by net exports. Looking ahead, I think growth is expected to strengthen further, boosted by the start of oil production. Obviously, any delays in oil production could pose a significant downside risk, both for the fiscal and the external sector. So that's really the first thing, is that the economy continues to strengthen. The second message is that despite tight external financial conditions, Uganda's macroeconomic environment has remained stable. As I said, inflation has been low, in fact has receded quite sharply on average from what it was a high of about 8.8% in FY23 to 3.2% in FY24. Second, overall fiscal deficit, that's the central government deficit, has continued to narrow, although I would add that the pace of reduction is slowing from 5.5% of GDP in FY23 to some 4.8% of GDP in FY24. And third, we've seen that the Uganda shilling remained pretty stable, and lastly, public debt to GDP ratio have remained almost stationary at around towards 50.6% of GDP. The third message coming out of the update is that at the same time that there are signs of heightened vulnerability. This is very much evident from the elevated debt servicing cost, accompanied by a shortfall in the country's development spending. We have seen quite a bit of cut, in fact, in recent months, and increased domestic and non-concessional borrowing, which limits, obviously, the available credit to the private sector, as well as elevated current account deficit that has been a source of, I think, persistent pressure on the international reserves among the, obviously, given the very tight external financing conditions. More importantly for me, I think there is a huge need to create more, better, and more inclusive jobs. I see the jobs agenda really as probably the most fundamental challenge the economy is facing, and that obviously gets to the question of productivity in the economy. So given these developments, what should really be the policy priorities going forward? I think first and foremost, Uganda will need to continue its fiscal consolidation, both from the revenue side, but also from the expenditure management side. I think Uganda's fiscal consolidation can be made more effective and more growth accelerating by pursuing perhaps a more balanced adjustment in spending by allocating more resources to human capital development and growth enhancing activities while improving domestic revenue mobilization efforts. Obviously, with higher revenues, this will enhance the government's capacity to spend, which I think is going to be critical during an election year. However, domestic resource mobilization effort by itself is not enough. I think it needs to be supported by policies to identify and eliminate wasteful expenditures. And in that respect, I think the public sector rationalization initiative that the government is undertaking, I think it's an important one, if done well. As we discuss in the report, along with deepening reforms in public investment management. I want to add, in fact, here that as discussed earlier, in earlier World Bank reports, I think efficiency gains in capital utilization could generate quite significant growth. In fact, our estimates suggest that between 0.2 to 0.5 percentage points of GDP growth annually can be generated with more efficient spending on capital. So that's the first, I think, policy direction is about fiscal consolidation. The second one, and that's quite obvious, obviously, the elevated current account deficit and limited capital flows continue to weigh on Uganda's international reserves, and that's why you've seen reserves remain relatively low at what's about 3 months of import coverage for the last year or so. Despite strong coffee and gold exports, the current deficit remains quite high due to rising oil project-related imports. Therefore, I think export diversification along with exchange rate flexibility will be very, very important going forward. Third, I think Uganda needs to address its fundamental development challenge, and that is the productivity challenge I talked about. How can the economy create more, better, and more inclusive jobs? And that is really how do we move from the current growth model to a much more private sector-led growth model. We have seen that the cost of credit in Uganda has increased quite significantly. If I remember correctly, a couple of months ago when I was here, I think lending rates were in the order of about 18%, and that it's already a 4 percentage points higher than the year before. So obviously these very high interest rates make it difficult for the private sector to invest. And of course, that also, I think the significant borrowing from the government also crowds out private investment as well. And lastly, I think in the longer term, there are some significant structural challenges which worsen the job situation, I think, can strain the existing social contract. In that respect, I think Uganda needs urgently, and I think the government is right, to prioritize job-rich economic transformation by recognizing first that human capital is key to Uganda's development. In fact, the studies that we have seen show that the up to close to 50% of the difference of economic growth between countries, it's actually attributable to the level of human development. So clearly there is a very high returns to investments in human capital. And I think you also have a very important demographic opportunity, right? You have one of the youngest and faster growing population in the world. So the question is really, how do we leverage that demographic dividend and to build a workforce that's fit for the future? And in that respect, obviously, and that's the focus of, special focus of this report, is really on early childhood development. I won't get too much, I won't try to steal your show, so won't reveal too much about that, but just to say I think it's really, really important to invest in early childhood development. The question is, where do you find the money? And that's why the sort of public expenditure rationalization and improving domestic revenue mobilization will be critical. I think there's a huge cost of not doing anything in that area. By not investing in, for example, in pre-primary, and that's early childhood, Uganda could miss out at potentially some $45 billion in foregone future earnings as today's young children grow up without being supported and equipped with the skills that they need to succeed in society. So investing in early childhood development, it's critical, and not doing that now will be very, very costly. And I think Uganda has a unique opportunity to transform its economy over the next few decades. As Mukami mentioned, the World Bank, as Uganda's long-term development partner, stands ready to support Uganda to maximize this opportunity by investing in young people's future productivity today. Thank you very much.
I think the applause was a bit weak. And I fear that if it's not sufficient, our coffee may not come. The man pays the bills, so you better clap for him. So thank you very much for that backgrounder. I'll just mention that both Chimiao and Mukami have an obligation. So if they leave us, it's not because they don't take us seriously. It's because they have an obligation that they have to attend to. So but thank you very much for opening and allowing us to have our conversation. I just wanted to point out that, the things you've said, I read the report. The one statistic that struck me is that our children, is it our children or all of us, are only productive at 39%. So for all the noise we make in the world, that's all we do. So, but all of that is coming. My people will be talking to you about all this stuff, and we've got to take it seriously. Having said that, I'm sure you're all wondering where the program is and the report is. There will be something called a QR code. It will be on the screens. All you have to do is point your digital device. This is called late adulthood development. Forget early childhood development. This is, we're now bringing you by force into the 21st century. That's how you'll be able to download the report. You'll also be able to get the program that we're following. So just point, and please don't photograph. Point, it will give you a signal. Then you press on that and then you have the documents. Don't waste too much time. The printed reports are for people who have decided to remain in the Stone Age. So just look, when you see somebody with a printed report, you know they've decided to stay behind. So our conversation is going to be in two parts. The first one is going to be about the economy, and then the second part will be about the investments we need to make in early childhood development. So to get us started, to tell us what is in the report, or maybe before we start, allow me to announce the arrival of the Honorable Minister of State for Finance, Honorable Henry Musasizi. He's the Minister of State for Finance for General Duties. I know many of you, some of you sitting here have never seen a government minister. That's how they look like. Honorable Minister, your timing is perfect. It's the point at which I welcome Mr. Silva Namunane, who is an economist at the World Bank, to deliver the first part of the Uganda economic update, which is about the state of the economy. I am sure you'll be very happy to hear what he has to say. Silva.
Thank you, Robert. Well, my country director has kind of given you all high-level messages, so my job becomes simpler. All I have to do is show you a couple of graphs that kind of repeat what exactly my country director just said. But good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the launch of the Uganda Economic Update. Honorable Minister, you're welcome. We're happy to have you here. Thank you for joining us. This is an important topic. We hope that you can help us steer the ship in the right direction from the government side. Now, maybe before we just jump straight into what's going on with the Ugandan economy, it's kind of helpful to kind of get a sense of where the global economy is at, largely because the global economy has suffered from a bunch of shocks, a couple of shocks, a lot of them actually, that people did not actually expect the countries to recover quite quickly. But what gives us hope is that growth is kind of remaining resilient, and inflation levels have actually gone down at a global level. Now, the decrease in inflation can actually be observed, but ideally the trends are still above pre-pandemic times. Our hope is that those numbers can actually keep coming down further, but the decrease has been quite strong, and I think something that we actually hoped for. Now, coming down to the Ugandan economy, the economy is kind of been seen to grow very strongly. I think this is a very familiar story to everybody who has kind of observed growth in this country over the years. The Ugandan economy is resilient. It's kind of probably been more resilient than most people would have expected, posting a growth rate of 6.1% in the last year compared to what they posted before, which was 5.3. But having said that, Q1 has also kind of posted a very strong growth that we see here. 6.7 is very high growth and kind of really driven by net exports like we did actually see. But where is this growth coming from? It's kind of broad in nature. It's coming from largely all the sectors. We see largely agriculture, services sector, and we also see some contribution from industry. So it's just kind of growth is actually coming from pretty much everywhere. Now, there's these high frequency indicators that we basically see from largely the Uganda Bureau of Statistics. These indicators just give us a sense of what is business optimism, what are people thinking about, business prospects. Are they actually stronger or are they actually weaker? Now, the manufacturers and people in the construction industry are basically seeing a very big optimism. Of course, there's a little bit of challenges with agriculture and retail trade. These are basically the ones largely in yellow towards the end. But overall, everybody is quite optimistic that this growth is actually going to continue going forward. Now, having said that, the economy really remains strong, and it's actually recovered quite well compared to all the other economies within the region. You know, we can see Uganda is kind of popping up, so we hope that we can sustain that kind of growth, going forward. And maybe as the country grows, we can basically see some bit of transformation, basically transforming the economy in a sense that people get to feel the economy. They always tell you this, they want to feel the economy in their pockets. If they don't feel the economy in our pockets, we can talk of high growth, and then we leave it there. People want to feel the economy in their pockets. Now, here on inflation, really well, very good job, really. We have no concerns here, largely because I think there's been a prudent monetary policy stance by the central bank, which has actually kept inflation very low. Both co-op and headline have kind of been really very low, but you can see that the peak in inflation was largely driven by food crops, but that has kind of come down, and it still remains below the 5% target, which is the central bank target. Now, tight monetary policy kind of helps. The central bank rate has kind of remained at about 9.75%, and if you remember, quite in a few months back, the central bank also increased the cash reserve ratio, which kind of keeps everything tight and ensures that prices remain really low. So in that, we really commend the country for quite doing a very good job to ensure that the macros remain in order. Now, on the external sector, I think the current account deficit has really remained a little bit elevated, but this is largely because of oil imports, basically imports meant to support the oil sector. And of course, we've also seen export growth really being very strong, and largely this is basically coming from favorable prices, coffee, gold, and the volumes have actually also gone up. So we kind of see a little bit of a strong, robust export growth that is basically being observed here. The other thing on the import side, of course, you know, when you're building, when you're investing quite heavily in the oil and gas industry, you're going to see imports go up quite heavily. So we've seen basically increases in volumes here, and largely this is mostly related to oil imports. But the hope is that we can see some improvement once those imports go up. Now, external conditions remain tight. So when the financial flows are relatively lower, we can expect the reserves are actually going to suffer here. And we've seen a dip a bit from 4.5 down to 3.4. Like I said, I'm only showing you some graphs. My country director gave you all the key messages here to just kind of give you a sense. Now, fiscal consolidation is a very interesting story in this country, but the quality of it needs to improve. We cannot re-emphasize this any better. When you're cutting spending, let's cut the wasteful spending, because once you cut development spending in some way, you're largely going to constrain growth. So let the quality of spending be better, but let there also be some bit of improvement in domestic revenue mobilization. Uganda collects about 13.7% of GDP now in tax revenues. Those revenues are not enough. The country can actually collect more revenue without necessarily overly burdening the compliant taxpayers by bringing in new taxpayers in the tax net, and at least trying to tax the areas that have quite been very difficult, including high net worth individuals. Once you live in a country, you need public services, and to provide those public services, someone has to be able to pay for them. Everybody at least needs to contribute to raising that revenue. And once that is done, I think we can see that the deficit could probably come down a little bit further, even if it has kind of been going down from 5.5 to 4.5. Would hope that deficit would actually continue to decrease. Overall, again, like the macros always look very good. According to the joint World Bank IMF DSA report, Uganda's risk of overall debt distress basically is kind of remained modest. This is unchanged from the previous time. However, there is limited space to absorb shocks. Largely, it means that once you do some stress testing here, some of the indicators get bleached. We're talking debt service to exports, debt service to reserve ratios. But nonetheless, pay attention to what's actually going on with creditors. We've seen an increase largely in commercial debt, which is very expensive debt. And in a sense, partly that money could largely go to the private sector in some way. So private sector credit has kind of remained relatively low. The growth has been relatively lower at about 8, which is lower than the 12% that was observed pre-pandemic. Now, the outlook looks really good, largely because we expect oil revenues to come on board. That's what is driving really growth medium term, to at least the first time we're seeing double digit, at least in the more recent years. We basically hope that growth will move up from this year probably at 6.2, before kind of moving on to at least 10.8, then dropping back again to 6. But that will kind of remain at 6 in the medium term going forward. Now, inflation is also expected to remain within the central bank target. FDI flow is expected to increase at least as investments in the oil sector continue. And then we see that the data as a percent of GDP is basically expected to remain within the charter, the limits provided in the Charter of Fiscal Responsibility. But overall, that remains quite sustainable. Now, this doesn't mean that there are no downside risks. I think this is where we need to kind of pay attention to some of these things. The oil story in Uganda didn't start today. It started way back in 2016, 2017. We've been kind of expecting to get the first oil for a relatively longer time. Now, given the level of investment that has gone in, now we can say maybe we are getting somewhere. But if there's a mismatch between the completion of the East African crude oil pipeline and the date of first oil, then we're kind of delaying growth. With the numbers that we're seeing, we shall not basically see them. One thing that we also need to pay attention to, Uganda still has rain-fed agriculture. Climate shocks remain a bigger problem. Once we don't get into adaptation mode, once we don't invest into adaptation, we are kind of going to be affected quite significantly as a country. Now, there's also this EU regulation on basically on coffee exports. If you're kind of clearing forest cover and you're growing coffee there, it becomes a risk. Now, what is basically driving growth is basically being threatened here. So it still remains a risk. Coffee is good for a country, but if some people are going to say we are clearing forests and then we can't export our coffee to some of those markets that we have, well, we're kind of killing our exports here as a country. The Middle East is an important place for Uganda. 26% of the exports go to the Middle East. If there's conflict there, supply chains get disrupted, and we really can't see that growth that we're seeing now. Now, one other thing that remains important that we cannot really emphasize enough is that Uganda is in a unique place. You have very many young people. These people need to have jobs once they're ready to work. A large labor force is only helpful to the economy if the economy can absorb those people into the workforce. So we cannot re-emphasize creating jobs, more jobs and better jobs, formal jobs that can actually help improve the livelihoods of people. That's when you actually put money in people's pockets. And again, we need to raise more revenue. 13.7% is not enough. We need to go as high as at least 20. And I think the government has those plans, but then we need to think carefully about what we're taxing, not to be able to overburden the already compliant taxpayers. I will leave it at this, and thank you very much.
So, Silver, while you were talking, the people sitting around me were already quarreling, which means we are in for a very vibrant debate. They were raising some issues. Honorable Minister Chimea Mukami, Bernard introduced me with some reference to my past. I used to be a very powerful person in this country, and then something happened. So one of the things that used to happen every Saturday morning is the whole country would stop and listen to me. And things have changed, so I'm much less important now. But one of the things we discussed was this report in the early 2000s regularly. But that hasn't ended. So tonight, technology has changed and things have changed. Now I will have this debate on another forum. So at 8 p.m. today, for those of you who are on a platform called X, that's if you're in the 21st century. If you're still dealing with text messages, I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do for you. But those of you who live in the digital world, this debate will continue tonight at 8 p.m. And at that point, we will have no formalities. So it will be freewheeling, and the public will be welcome to participate at that point. So please make a note, 8 p.m. Uganda time. If you're in another part of the world, figure out what that is, and then we'll have that debate. So now I am ready to go into the discussion. First of all, I will ask Silva. You can't run away from a discussion you have provoked, so please come and take your seat. Allow me to invite Mr. Moses Dekavie, who is the Technical Advisor for Economic Affairs at the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development. Moses, please come and take your seat. And then we've got Dr. Fred Muhumuza. When he arrived, we were asking ourselves, we can't seem to avoid each other, me and him. We find ourselves in these spaces, but he provided the answer. He said, at least me and you work on finding out what the problems of the country are. The solutions is another matter. So Fred is the director of the Makerere University Business School Economic Forum. Fred, you are most welcome. Then, this one I am going to speak with a lot of confidence because I finally figured out, let me first invite Alan. Alan Senyondwa, Director Policy and Advocacy at the Uganda Manufacturers Association. Alan, you're welcome. Alan is the one who was shaking his head vigorously, Silva, as you were presenting. So I'm looking forward to some fireworks on stage. And the lead country economist, Mr. Bill Battle. I got the name right. So, Bill, please welcome on stage. So, there will be time for those of you seated in the audience if you would like to engage with this conversation. I'll give you an opportunity. It will be at my discretion that you're going to learn what Dictatorship 101 is about. So, because I'll be determining who can speak and for how long. So we've got, let me see. So we've got 45 minutes. If you look at your watches, it's close to 10 o'clock. So we will spend that time creating insights. I must warn the academics on the panel. This is not a lecture. It's just perspectives, provoking thought. So please let the presentation be for Silva alone. The rest of us will be. So I'll start with you, Fred. And one of the things that has come up is investment in our population dividend. That's the main theme of this report. So given Uganda's young and youthful population, significant investment is needed to transform them into a productive workforce. Otherwise, they're a burden. In order to drive economic growth. What strategies, from your perspective, do you think the government should implement to allocate budgetary resources towards early childhood development? And how do you balance this with things like debt repayment, soldiers in the barracks? There are some people who sit across the street there who consume quite a bit of our resources. You know who I'm talking about. I don't need to tell you. How do we balance all those plus investment in our young people? I hope the mic is on.
Okay, thank you, and good morning, everybody. I think he's just given us some hints on the answers. You can't allocate money you do not have, so we need to first find the money. And where is that money? And sometimes you say budgeting, you should be able to budget because you can allocate resources. I was reading through some of the government documents. Every time the budget goes up, the amount available for discretionary allocation goes down. Meaning the budget is already a given. So you start with a budget of 66 trillion. Half or more than half of that is debt. And by our budgeting principles, debt takes the first call on resources. Mm-hmm. So 50% or more of your budget is not available for you to tamper with.
No, to allocate. The tampering, I'll bring it up, but to allocate.
Yeah, it's exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
So that leaves you with less than 50%.
Okay.
Then you have salaries and wages. Is the second call on resources. Mm-hmm. That will eat off another good chunk.
Yeah.
Then you have statutory. Really, when you talk about statutory, is not even for appropriation. It's already a given. Monies you must spend, whether you like it or not. So at the end of the day, when we say, can we increase allocations to early childhood, where is the money? We need to answer that question first. I hear conversations with domestic resource mobilization, but when the pond is dry, it doesn't matter how well skilled you are in fishing.
But Silva said something here. He said, can we bring more people into the tax net to move from 13 to 20. I remember him. So
Yes, and that's what we're saying. When you look at the tax register, the URA has done so much to increase the tax register. But literally close to 70% of Uganda's tax comes from about 1,000 taxpayers. So the rest of us you are bringing on, you realize we're actually below the threshold of paying tax. We don't have the money. So we've got to think and say, have we built an economy that we can tax? We need to begin there. Because the people you're going to bring in, and I think Silva raised it as well, don't strain the already stressed taxpayers. I may have rentals, but people haven't paid rent for the last 5 months, and I'm just chasing them, hoping I'll get some decent tenant. So how do we resolve those kinds of things? So it's more than simply increase their investment. We need to get back into a conversation on how do we find the money. And we had thought rationalization of government, not just agencies.
the whole government.
People missed out the other apex part of it. It was a rationalization of public expenditure. And I think Silva raises some of those points. How do we cut wasteful expenditure within government to free some resources?
Where's
and
the
get some money?
where's the waste? Because you're very clear. You've said there's debt, there is this, there is that. Now, where's the waste? And when you talked about tampering, there is now a new phenomenon called supplementary budgets. So that's the tampering I was talking about.
Yeah, but also a fiscal discipline. I was reading.
You
the
notice
auditor-
I'm not looking the other side because I don't want the minister to see my face.
I was reading the Auditor General's report, and I think this report comes very handy. It touches medical aspects.
Right.
One of my best reports that I always say that propels the medical career forward is the post-mortem report. What went wrong?
Yes.
How can we improve the future? Now, in this country, we kind of don't give respect to the due levels of the Auditor General's report. You'll find it is mentioning certain, I think 186 billion of entities that received supplementary funding without asking for it. An
Wait,
accounting office has not asked for money, you give him money as a supplementary budget. 186 billion, and that's just a tip of the iceberg. Can we recognize these reports because they help us to improve what is not going right? You're talking about further investment.
Right.
Government arrears, domestic. Auditor General reports 13.8 trillion for 2023-2024.
Yeah.
Government is providing 200 billion to resolve a problem of 13.8 trillion. Private sector, money that private sector has delivered to government, government has not paid it back. Remember when we're talking about finding money for children, it's not be the government budget. How can we empower the private companies where these people work, where they earn their salaries, to go and look after their families, and then government can complement. So I don't want to only look at government must increase allocations. Government must set an environment that household can find money to look after these 0 to 3 and 3 to 5. That's where my dilemma is. And we're here tracking, saying the economy is doing well. I think we need to change the indicators of economic performance.
To what?
The more relevant indicators.
Which are?
GDP is good to say we have grown at 6%. But at what rate should we be growing? When I'm going to Arua, don't tell me I'm driving, I've improved my speed from 20 kilometers an hour to 30. I'll still get there after a week. So if Uganda wants to improve itself, at what rate should we be growing? That's what I am looking for. And the relevant indicators, and the medical people are going to be here later on in a panel, they put these things into context. Height for age. This child is actually increasing in height. But is this the height they should be on at this age? The same thing, weight for age. The child is adding on weight. But is this where they should be? Now, if Uganda is growing at 6, put into context the young population, the debt context, and so don't tell me because 6% is bigger than the US, we are better than the US. No, put that context into us. At what rate should we be? So I think we are not speaking to ourselves if we are to address these issues of where is the money that we can invest to improve the children's welfare.
Before I go to Moses, and I, I'll put this to you, but it will be a good entry point to bring in Moses. I want to ask a follow-up question. Do we need to revisit the budgeting process? Is it realistic? Does it reflect? Or is it something we do as a matter of course but doesn't reflect, So that would be where most of these questions would be answered. Do the people who make the decisions actually understand how they're allocating?
As I've mentioned, when you're in a traffic jam, what options do you have? So if you have a fixed budget where 98% is determined for you, then what decision do you have on the budget? And we have seen our budgets are really fixed. Sometimes I have pity for the ministers and the technocrats who have to begin budgeting, but literally 98% of your budget is already fixed. So you have only 2% margin of error or flexibility to do the budgeting. And while you are doing that, some emergency comes up. Ebola will pop into the house, and then you have mpox, and then you have something worse, something in the neighborhood or wherever it is.
Yeah.
And then I was looking at the second budget called circular. Budget support for the other year, at least what they are mentioning, was about 1,300 billion. Today, as we stand, it is 26 billion. So where is the budget?
And there are new changes in the world order, but I don't want to go into that. Moses, expenditure-based fiscal consolidation. You opted out of increasing taxes. You decided that you wanted to simply cut expenditure. How has this affected your investment, particularly in the area of early childhood development? How can we get more money? And I'm saying this knowing full well that some of the partners that were helping in funding some of those areas of early childhood development and so on are revisiting their whole, I don't want to say many things. Things are changing. So how has this affected you and where do we get the money?
Thank you. Thank you, Robert. I hope I'm okay if I call you Robert.
My circumstances have changed. I'm just Robert now. So
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I just want to go back to the question of fiscal consolidation. Fiscal consolidation is not just cutting expenditure. But the key elements of this fiscal consolidation agenda is actually boosting domestic revenue mobilization. And we have a domestic revenue mobilization strategy that we're implementing. Of course, in the beginning, it was slow, but now the pace is accelerating. But it also has to do with improving efficiency of public expenditure and repurposing public expenditure to focus on high impact growth areas, jobs creation, and all that. We're also looking at, we've been carrying out reforms supported by the World Bank here, improving public investment management. And that reform is actually ongoing. Not only that, we're also looking at debt sustainability. When you look at the way we borrow now, we are looking at borrowing. We are not going to stop borrowing, but we're improving the effectiveness of the monies that we borrow. In other words, focusing on, again, high impact growth areas. We are looking at, the oil and gas area. We are looking at tourism development. We are looking at agro-industrialization. We are looking at manufacturing and all those other areas. Well, so when we grow the economy and get more revenue, then also your debt sustainability numbers actually improve, but also you're able to get some money to allocate to these other areas. Of course, the timing matters. Yeah. And it's not going to happen all the time at the same time. So there's going to be a gradual shifting of resources, what we are calling repurposing the budget. And that is happening. It started this year, and it's going to accelerate. But also, in terms of expenditure efficiency, we've been reviewing tax expenditures, for instance, and undertaking a reform in those tax exemptions, expenditures, and so on, to make sure that actually they are beneficial to the economy, but also other areas of fiscal reforms.
But Moses, just to go back to this specific report, I mean, yes, why aren't we, and I'm going to put you on the spot on this one, the dividend from or the benefits of investing in early childhood development have been laid out. Are we going to, will this repurposing in high impact areas take into account the quality of the children that we are bringing forth? Because we can do all of these high impact things, but our children are not in a position to participate in this economy. So when will we move to bring these children to a point where they can actually participate meaningfully in the economy? Otherwise, we'll have high impact and the jobs are being created for our neighbors and for people from outside, and then we will just remain where we are. So why don't you see ECD as a high impact area? Are you willing to look at it that way?
Actually, that is happening already, and there is a policy that was approved by Cabinet in May 2024 in this regard. But when you look at also the public expenditure, we over the last 15 years, we focused so much on infrastructure development. We are balancing expenditure now and emphasizing human capital development, including child education. So when you look at, and the minister probably will speak to this, I don't want to preempt what he's going to say.
Yeah.
You look at the budgets in these areas, especially education, they are improving and they are going up. So, but as I said before, the key thing is getting the funding, and this is going to be through efficiency gains, through revenue mobilization, but also some borrowing.
Can you just speak more to the actual measures of what you're actually doing to generate more revenue? What are you actually doing in terms of making sure more money comes in?
Yeah, much of the measures are in administration, more than increasing tax rates and so on.
Yeah.
So it's automation, improving audits, ensuring that the audits are frequent in order to be able to increase the taxable base, but also education, ensuring that there is taxpayer education so that people know exactly what they are supposed to be doing, and also ensuring that there is a social contract between the taxpayers and the government so that the people can actually see the benefit. And there is a lot of effort now within the URA to actually root out corruption within URA, but also in the entire government systems. And once we do that, then we should be able to actually realize some of these revenues.
This one I'll leave to the minister, because I'll say, Mr. Minister, what happens to the political will to deal with this waste? That one I think is yours. I will not disturb my friend Moses, because we remember last year there were some people who tampered with the budget. There was a lot of drama. They were taken somewhere and then released. So then what happened? Those people had wanted to steal our money in broad daylight. So, Alan Senyondwa, how do you see the benefit for you, the manufacturers, of investing in children early? What do you think will be the impact in terms of skilled labor? You are the one in manufacturing. What do we need to do? You need to press that, yeah.
There we go. Thank you very much, Robert. I hear you go by the names Robert these days. Thank you very much
Okay.
for that invite. Now, allow me to say something before we go to the question of early childhood development and investment therein. I think the challenge we have for us who are in the private sector, especially for us who are in high impact areas of the private sector, is when we, the latecomers, I call us the latecomers, anyone who hasn't yet become a middle income country, and you're a latecomer to the economy,
Right.
the global economy. How do you, as a latecomer to the global economy, maneuver the challenges we have? I'll give an example for us to understand why we in the private sector find this a very difficult scene to play in.
Yeah.
And that's why you saw me shaking my head. The macros seem to be good. I insist, same. The economy is growing anywhere between 5.7, 6.2. Wow.
And then,
If I stop at that,
yeah,
you go, wow.
yeah.
After all, the Europeans are growing at 2.1%, 1.8%. The Americans are growing thereabout. So we should be doing better than them.
Yeah.
Until you dig a little bit deeper.
So help us.
Your population is growing at 3.2%.
Okay.
Your depreciation is at 4%. So when you come and mention 6.2%, we don't tell the full story.
So you're saying we're in negative growth?
I will not say that, but you do the mathematics for yourself.
I'm just a lawyer. Mathematics is not.
That is a huge challenge that we face. You have a challenge of growth, you have a challenge of population growth, you have a challenge of depreciation, you have a challenge of now the 15% bonds and things like that. You're left with 18% credit rates at banks. What does that mean? That unless your return on investment is above 50%, you are not going to invest.
So so how does a situation like that then affect investment in early childhood? Yeah.
So I will go back to that and say we need to go back to the fundamentals.
Which are?
Production, productivity, production, productivity, production, productivity. Unless you are able to invest in production and productivity, it is just a song.
So and I'm not letting you go, because at the risk of my friend Robert Okudi strangling me, how do we invest, one, in making sure that we have a skilled labor force that is also healthy? Because if it's not healthy, it may have some skills, but if it's not healthy, their productivity is also low. So what do you see as something that needs to be done about that?
So
Change the curriculum, do what we...
no, let's go back to the pre-primary education.
Yeah.
Actually, why it's very key. Now, if you have seen children who have had pre-primary education,
Yeah.
by primary level 3, they are able to do their mathematical tables of 12 times 12 and so on. That gives you a huge advantage mathematical-wise. Because remember, we're talking about finances. Finances is mathematics. You're talking about production. Production is mathematics at the end of the day.
And application of technology?
Technology is, at the end of the day, the ability to calculate and think deeply, cognitive thought.
Right.
That, and we know that science tells us that between the age of 3 to 7, that's when most of your brain cells are really developing. So if you do not do the development at the early, in pre-primary school, and you wait for it later, the study shows that anyone who is unable to do proper mathematical calculations by primary 3, 4, you are never going to catch up. No matter what happens, you're never going to be able to do the complicated mathematics and logs. Now, that is one part. The other part is the ability for you to handle skills. When we talk about carpentry, we talk about AI, we talk about these other things, they need you to have another level of thought process. That means the confidence, however, can only be developed at that lower level.
So if we miss that point...
If you miss that point, you're only playing catch-up. So we need to do a lot of investment at that stage, so that the confidence is built in, the rates of dropout reduce, the ability to think deeply is increased. So we must invest in that early childhood.
So talking about that investment, do you see a possible partnership between the private sector and the government in terms of raising resources to invest? Because, I mean, in other countries, whether we like it or not, it's not just the government that makes this investment. It also falls to, foundations. And so is this something that you guys in the private sector, especially the manufacturing side, are willing to support and sponsor colleges, for instance, early childhood, for some kind of vocational.
Thank you very much. And this is where
Do you just want to pull up the mic a bit? Because
yes, this is where development economics really meets, the rubber meets the road. Because every time you let the private sector lead on some of these social aspects, you get huge divides in the society.
How?
So what have we seen over the last few years? The private sector has invested heavily in education for private sector purposes, i.e. business modeling. So you are investing in education not for the purposes of social development, but rather economic development, business development. So you are seeing this education as the investment as a business. Now what happens is it is then available to those who are able to get it. So the investment, as you say, is how do you then pull in government to ensure that the divide doesn't become so huge? Because the best universities will always be private universities. The best primary, secondary schools will always be private schools. The best primary schools will always be private primary schools. The best nursery schools in the country are actually private. So the question is, there's investment there, but is it for everyone or for a section? And therefore, how do you pull in government to ensure there is equity and there is all strands of the economy are able to tap into, to partake of this quality education that you need?
So that the 70%, because that's what it is, guys who are 18 and below in Uganda can then have a chance at participating in your sector. Right, so Bill, how does the World Bank build a strong connection between the growth that Silva has so ably articulated and early childhood development so that the Ugandans can participate in this economy and generate the productivity and production required to be wealthy? Yeah.
Thanks very much, Robert. We don't know each other, but I'll call you Robert, as others have done. And I don't know your previous incarnation, but thanks very much for the question.
Yeah.
I think this is, and as one of the newest members of the World Bank team on Uganda, and very happy that Silver is now on the panel. I'll handle a bit of this question,
Yeah.
which I think is really a segue question between first panel, second panel. So the importance of human capital on growth, what is the World Bank's contribution on that? I think just to take a step back, I think there's been a lot of pointed questions. Where do we find the money? And if I'm in government and I'm asked to put a priority on expenditure, I would want to see the evidence that this pays off. And I think in this particular area on human capital, ECD even being a little bit more difficult because it's much more on the front end.
Yeah.
I think measurement of human capital impacts on growth have been quite difficult. Kind of the earliest work on this that I know of was the Barrow-Lee cross-country equations, where just labor on the right-hand side didn't reveal anything. You had to qualify that to augmented labor, talk about years of schooling to get that to come up as something significant. We've, I think, moved way past that, but obviously it's difficult. The returns are long-term. It takes a lot of time to do it. Improvements in human capital. Somebody mentioned our human capital index, which for Uganda is 0.38, 0.39. This moves very slowly. Growth, on the other hand, is relatively quite volatile. There's also differences between quality of growth, and I'm glad it was flagged by the panelists in terms of what is the right growth rate for the Uganda.
Yeah.
So 6%. What is the right number? I think in terms of what that growth is composed of is really the question.
Yes.
I think, as was said, maybe you're growing twice the rate as the U.S., but we're certainly not doing twice as well in Uganda. I think if you take the example of Asian tigers, a lot of this was driven by export-led growth.
Yeah.
Whereas in Africa, a lot of it is commodity-based, more volatile, doesn't produce a lot of jobs. So this question of what is the right number, I think there's a equally important question, which is what are the sources and drivers of this growth. I think our country director really pointed to the direction for the World Bank on this issue, which is the bottom line is jobs, the bottom line is productivity. So we can talk about a growth rate, we can talk about the drivers of that growth. But until people are employed, working, and productivity as a proxy for labor income, I think why we talk about productivity so much is that generally translates into, as Silver put it, more in your pocket, feeling it more in your pocket. I think in terms of what the World Bank is doing, and when we think about this jobs agenda, right, it's two sides of a coin, two sides of an equation. On the supply side, I think this is our focus on this special topic. So on human capital, this is really talking about upping the game for the quality of labor supply here in Uganda. And it needs that investment. I think that includes early childhood development and a lot of other issues that have come up, including education and health and social protection. On the demand side, which I think as a macroeconomist, this is a lot more personally where I'm focused in my work, is how to get the private sector hiring, or where are they hiring and how to actually boost that. So you can talk about where's the money for the public sector investment, which I think on human capital, it's a fundamental component of that. But on the private sector, and in anticipation of your follow-up question, where are those jobs coming from? I'm glad Silver's here because he can take the brunt of that one.
Yeah.
But I do know from your national development plan, it's laid out a plan for creating 4.4 million jobs over the next 5 years. Most of those jobs are in services, followed by agriculture, and thirdly on industry. But it does beg the question. So how are we going to get those? And it's also to be noted, mining directly is only 1%, less than 60,000 of those jobs. But how do we get there? I think we need to work on both sides of that equation with the private sector, business environment, infrastructure for connectivity, digital connectivity, and I'm happy to say the World Bank is actually working on both sides of that equation, and it can certainly do more on that. But for the payoff on human capital, even for infrastructure, which you may see the benefits a little bit more, but I think the impetus and the special topic for this economic update is largely about the signaling of getting those investments prioritized, or at least having that discussion. I understand the external financing constraints that Uganda is currently facing. I would echo points on DRM. I would echo some of the specifics, and you pointed, I think, our friend with very specifics on DRM, where are you going to find that money?
Yeah.
I think our own work, and Silver is leading that, in areas like tax exemptions for high-income individuals, tax expenditures, how do we rationalize that, digital compliance on VAT in the digital sector, and then overall in terms of just communication with small businesses, with the public on tax policy. I think you don't have to go too far in the neighborhood to see how that can really raise issues, fundamental issues, and so I see the connections between the two parts of the report quite strongly, but saw my role on the panel as framing that a little bit for you. So let me pause, but I can tell you have a follow-up ready to go.
No, see, the thing for me is, and again, going back to reading this report, is people talk about the sectors that are creating the jobs, construction, tourism, services, but we're not tracking to see the competitiveness of Ugandans to participate in those sectors. So you can create all these jobs, but if the people, the quality of the people, the skills, the productivity, the work ethic is lacking, the guys in the tourism sector will be from the neighboring countries. The guys in the specialized agriculture sector, in manufacturing, I mean, Alan, you know this. When it comes to hiring people in the finance sector, a good part of them are from a country called India. So this investment for me, yes, we can create all the jobs, it might be that important, but perhaps to create the labor force, because Asia, one of the reasons they were able to do this is they had a very good labor force, and there were many. So I guess we can't run away from that issue, can we? We can create the jobs and quote them in statistics, but then if the people are unemployable, what happens?
So just very
Yeah.
quickly on that one, I would say you don't have the match, right? So you don't even have the job because
Okay.
the private sector is not hiring, right? You need
Right.
the workforce that's available, healthy, skilled, and if the private sector is not hiring, right? So if the product that they're looking at across, they're putting out openings and announcements, and if they're not seeing it, they're not going to get it. I think in terms of some of these entry points, we've got a growth report that was done a couple years ago, and I'd recommend a lot of people look at that. It talks about trade being really a source for potential economic transformation, and this is at the same time when a lot of the country is talking about oil. So I think in terms of policy management, you know, the textbook Dutch disease is that non-oil traded sector is not going to take off. That's the lagging sector. So I think the policy challenges just to get sectors lined up, competitiveness lined up, and that's on the pricing side. The Dutch disease is strictly on the on the pricing side. But what I'm encouraged about in that report is that it found when there were workers who had completed primary school, they were twice as likely to shift sectors, meaning largely moving out of agriculture and mostly, not into my friend's sector, but mostly into services, lower productivity services. It also found a lot of churning of
We have a name
of
for it
movement back.
in Uganda. It's called bordernomics. They all go into the bordernomics sector. So that riding motorcycles is what I do. Yeah.
And if they can make it, but there's also a bit of churning kind of back. So this kind of gig economy reflection, I think, I didn't know the term here, but I think it's actually something that can help, but it's certainly not the structural push forward I think that you need. In terms of the skills to go beyond that, maybe not financial sector where the productivity is very high and the accompanying labor income would be quite high. But I think on both sides of having the private sector in a position, which means not just ECD. Actually, this is going to pay off kind of longer term. But on the skills side, on the secondary, on primary, across. And then where do you prioritize? I'm very struck here on the budget challenges that the minister faces, and it's not a very easy area. But all I can say is that the World Bank is engaged on both sides, labor supply, labor demand, and will continue to support government efforts going forward.
It's not a very enviable job being Minister of Finance in Uganda. I mean, from what Muhumuza has pointed out, I don't know if my friend Henry sleeps enough, but I just want to say to the guys online, there's slightly over 150 people who are following on YouTube. Let us know if the signal is right and the sound is right, so that if there's anything that needs improvement, that can be done. Secondly, I am now going to allow you guys also, because you've been listening. It's now time for you to participate in this conversation. If you have questions, if you have issues, clarifications, things you want to say, this is your time. So I'll ask the guys around the other side to avail the mic. So while you're, oh wow, I thought it would come a little later. I'm going to take a bias towards the women because the panel is really a mano. It's not a panel. So I want to give top priority to the women to hear their voice and perspective. So so please, hands up for those who want to say something. Then I'll come to you. Then where are the women? I will exercise my discretion. Please bring me the mic, and then let's please introduce yourself. You don't have to recognize the big people here. I have done that for you. You don't have to thank me. I am doing a job, so that's fine. So just get straight to the point and say exactly what you have to say. He's here. The gentleman in glasses is here. And everybody has 2 minutes. If you can't sell me a product in 2 minutes, it's not worth buying. So shoot.
Okay, thank you. My name is Tangavel Palanivel. I'm Senior Economic Advisor from UNDP here. Yeah, thanks for the interesting discussion. I tend to agree all the points. Yes, investment in early childhood investment development is very, very critical. But at the same time, we need to look into what Bill said, like how do you actually, given the budget constraint, given that we don't have much flexibility on the expenditure, how do you actually prioritize the limited budget government have? So we need to look into the multiplier effect. And also we need to look into what is that actually we can do in the next 5 years or 7 years compared to what can be done after 15, 20 years. Yes, definitely the early childhood development investment is critical, but that investment probably going to contribute much more effectively in the 6th development plan, 2035 to 2040. But right now the priority is that the NDP4, they want to double the GDP, double in the next 5 years. They want to have increase tenfold growth in the next 15 years. The tenfold growth strategy focusing on agro-industrialization, mineral industrializations, and tourism, and say science and technology. But it's not focusing the skilling development, the means of achieving tenfold growth strategy.
In conclusion?
Yeah, conclusion. 68% of the current youth population, they are actually, we talk about democratic dividend, 68% of the youth, they are not contributing in any way to the current economic growth. 51% of the youth currently not in education, employment, training category. As per the latest census, 51% of the youth in this country is not in ideal status, hanging around, doing nothing, just depends on the parents' income, more than half of the youth. On top of it, 17% of the youth, they're looking for a job, but they're not getting job.
Okay.
If you add this one, 68% of the youth, they are not contributing to the current economic growth. So how, if I have $1 million, I would put more money on this skilling on the current youth so that I would get economy size in double in the next 5 years, then going to invest the early childhood development, which is going to get me dividend after 10, 15 years.
Thank you.
Yes, it's important, but we need to see the multiplier effect, which one going to bring more benefit in the near term, same time also the time horizon. These are some of those issues we need to look into that.
The ladies are waiting.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, she's right here. The gentleman on the other side, Godba, he's there.
Yeah, Godba Tumshabe, Great Lakes Institute for Strategic Studies. So in 2012, the World Bank published a report, which I think was very profound, transforming farms, human capital, and economic geography.
We are here.
This is 13 years later. In that report, the bank argued for investments in improving the quality of human capital as a pathway to transforming the economy.
Right.
So 13 years later, we are talking about early childhood development. So my question to the bank team is that in 2013, did we miss the point? Should we have talked about early childhood development in 2013 and maybe quality later?
Right.
Number two, and this is my final point, if we listen, I agree entirely with what Fred and Alan said, that the current budget process has limitations in terms of how much money you have available. Can the minister really speak now, not speak like a politician actually, because in most cases ministers speak like politicians. So the macroeconomics are very good. I mean, you feel good when you look at the macroeconomics. If a minister moved away from the political, they moved away the political hat, what is the truth that he can tell us about the budget and what we are not capable of doing at this moment? Thank you.
But Godba, the minister is the political head.
But he's also a Ugandan.
Okay. There's a gentleman right behind you in a pink shirt.
Thanks, Robert, for the gesture. I'm Sula Bernard and write for the second newspaper. So, question to Silva. We talked about our reserves being low, but because of the current account deficit, but you forgot that actually there's a big burden on our reserves caused by debt servicing obligations. And we pay about $200 to $300 million almost every year out of the reserves to pay debt to the World Bank. And
$300?
Yeah.
Only?
Close to that.
$300?
No, $300 million.
Oh, okay.
Yes. So the question is, how do we minimize the pressure of debt servicing on our foreign currency reserves?
Right.
And then two, on the tax bit, it's good for you to widen the tax base, but how much do you get out of you are trying to tax every contract that you do through stamp duty, where you are paying 3,000 shillings for it? Is that worth it? Thank you.
Okay, so what we're going to do, I don't want to have too many issues coming up and outstanding. So first of all, the bank questions came from Godba. I'll leave those to Silva and Bill. And then the ones that were raised, any of you guys can take them on, Fred, Moses, and Alan, because so let's start with the response to Godba. So Silva and Bill, if you want to talk about the specific question. Okay.
Thank you, Godba, right? If that's kind of said right now. Well, you raise very important questions and are quite pertinent. Quality and early childhood development; those things go hand in hand. You cannot have quality later on when you've not actually invested early. So the key thing here is actually having, I think, a longer-term goal to things. Usually, when you're prioritizing money to spend, you're thinking, fine, my kid is going to be ready to work in 16, 17 years from now when I start investing in the kid. And when you're investing in the kid today, you're probably not thinking far enough. Will he become a good worker? You're hoping that the kid becomes a good worker. So we cannot disentangle quality from early childhood development. Those two concepts tend to go together. But one of them actually has to happen way earlier. So back then in 2012, when you put out a report on quality of the labor force that we have as a country, you would want to think that at that time most people were not quite concerned that the Uganda has a young population, maybe the population hadn't quite grown. Now it's becoming apparent, and I want to say that this issue is not going away because the people are here. The children, the babies are here. And we need to be very careful because those babies become workers. And you don't want to end up with very many unemployed people. That's when your security of the country gets compromised and all things go wrong. So as we think about it, let's have a longer term view. It requires investment early, such that you have quality people who can go and work for Alan and the companies, or even build companies, actually. Because nowadays, young people like to build their own companies. They don't like to work for people. They like to work for themselves. They can become innovative, but we need to skill them right to be able to be innovative in those ways. Perhaps Bill will come in and say some more about it.
Was that a question the reserves?
Yes, I was going to get to Sula's,
Sula,
sure. Right? Sula's question. Yes, you raised an important question on how do we reduce the pressure on reserves. Man, we've been talking about DRM this morning. You raise revenue, no? So you look at it from a budget constraint of a government. On one end, you raise revenue, you borrow, you service your debt, and then on the other end, you actually have your expenditures. Now, if actually you're pulling out a lot of money out of reserves, largely because you're not raising enough revenues to actually service your debt, it becomes apparent that we need to raise enough revenue. But we kind of have to be quite careful there. Where are we taxing? Are we overly burdening the already compliant taxpayers? Or we are kind of creating an environment that propels them to pay taxes with ease and also bringing in newer taxpayers? Or also getting rid of some of the provisions that we have in the law that actually exempt certain types of businesses or certain types of individuals. We're saying let everybody contribute, but let the burden be relatively even or be relatively lower across all taxpayers. URA is going to do its job in terms of enforcement, but the enforcement actions need to be backed by law. If they're not going to tax you, it means you're exempt somewhere, somehow. They're not doing it out of the blue. Now, if they're coming to you and enforcing very hard, they have a target, and the target comes from somewhere. And that's you might quarrel now that the pressures are so high, but you're only raising 13.7%. You need more. So they need to think outside the box, not being too hard on the already compliant taxpayers, bring in newer people, but also while making it easier for people to actually pay taxes. Reduce the cost of compliance in some way. Enforcement will happen. They will come and collect taxes. Everybody should be willing to actually pay. But when everyone is paying, we should have everybody at least contribute to that cause. I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Robert.
Right. Bill, do you want to say anything?
Just very briefly, I think those are two very good questions. I think there was a report 13 years ago. Did you miss the boat? Should it have been ECD? I think we all know these reports, if they're not reflective in changes of policies, really what can be expected to change. What I think we have today, and this is actually an unusual economic update launch. I've been to many. We have a panel on the economy, I think because these issues are so prominent. But I think in the next session we'll hear an update to possibly some of the things that were in that earlier report. As I said, these things are so slow moving. The human capital is not going to be something that comes out in a report. There'll be another one in 10 years, I have no doubt, for Uganda as well. But let's update our thinking. I think that's what the value added from the bank team is today, and let's hear that. Very quickly on the current account question, which I think is a good one. It's been repeated a few times, macro's really good. The macro's looking good. So I would like to underscore the key vulnerability on the macro is on the current account side. So the question really flagged that. I think there is a point made about the growth in exports driving a bit of what the rosy numbers that we're seeing or the positive numbers that we're seeing. It's also to be noted in the report, a lot of this is on the price side. It's not increased production so much as it is the valuation of those net exports. So I'm not trying to put a damper. I think Uganda is actually tremendously resilient. We know of a lot of other economies in the neighborhood that haven't been. They've been much less so. There wasn't a big recession in 2020. And I think the overall report is definitely one of resilience and strength. But that's not to say there aren't some major vulnerabilities. And lastly, on jobs, and if I can just preempt a bit what we may be announcing, but I think the bank efforts on both between kind of the macro private sector group and the HD group is working on what we call jobs platform. We're doing it for a number of countries at the leadership of our country director. So it's at a starting point of how are we monitoring? What are we monitoring in terms of jobs and in terms of the factors, both on the supply side, the demand side, and this matching, where private sector is really hiring. So I just did want to give a signal in terms of being able to, not at this event giving total solutions, but actually moving forward in a much more rigorous way on the jobs front.
Right. So, Alan, Fred, Moses, I give each one of you 1 minute to tell me about the future. Where are we going? Who wants to go first?
Let me go first so that in case I steal somebody's minute, they will lose it.
I know I have 3 minutes, so I'll...
Exactly. So, the macro is not good.
Supplementary minute. Okay.
The macro is not good.
Okay.
I want to begin there. Because the macroeconomic policy is not good.
Right.
If you have lending rates and prime of 18%, non-prime is going all the way up to 40, 30, depending on your profile as a borrower.
Exactly.
So we are not investing. We know we have inflation. It is a problem. But we have decided to cure inflation by raising interest rates, and everybody knows when you raise interest rates, no investment will happen. Now, doctors are coming in after us. you do not cure obesity through starvation. You find another way. Now, if you are starving this economy, there is no aggregate demand, there is no investment, you cannot praise your low inflation. You have to find a balance between those, because people must still invest to create the jobs. Economics is very clear. The demand for jobs is derived demand. If an economy has no aggregate demand, no investment, there's no way you're going to create jobs. So you'll be happy, your inflation is down, but you have stabilized that plane, not at cruise level, but at a very low level. Forget about getting to your destination. Thank you.
Alan.
Now, Dr. Fred, you have stolen all the lines, but no, he is actually correct. The challenge we have is, even when you look at the budget and the tenfold growth and all these other things, the focus is not really on the production and productivity. We have so many fat around the bone and less meat around the bone. Meaning what? If we are going to grow this economy, let us focus on where the economy has to grow, production, not on the structures, governance, and all these other things. Silva has mentioned something. Unfortunately for us, we're already taxing, they're already compliant. And the tax burden is increasing tremendously on these same people. We talk about exemptions, but actually the reverse of what is happening on the other side is what is killing the sector. One, you are increasing your domestic revenue mobilization by taxing the already compliant. Number two, unfortunately, your aggregate demand is not increasing. So you asked, Bill asked the question, why is the private sector not hiring? There is no demand. So if you can't, if your economy is not really growing from the grassroots, then you can't hire because the grassroots is actually not spending. That leads you to the export promotion. So if the challenge is, again, the exports are price-based, not productivity-based. So A, you're not producing enough. B, you're not producing at the rate at which you're supposed to be producing to have that money coming in, so that the domestic revenue takes place, so that you hire more, so that you can educate more. So it is, unfortunately for us, is the economy, the way it works, is a circular thing.
Okay. Let the technical advisor on economic affairs conclude this conversation. I've given him the last word.
Yeah, I think we need to be more positive than being pessimistic.
Now you know why I gave you the last word.
When you look at our macroeconomic environment, it's extremely good. Yeah. That's not to say that there are no challenges in the economy. We have challenges at institutional level. We have challenges that we are addressing at micro level. And that's why we're implementing the PDM, okay, the parish development model, in order to bring in, to monetize the lower levels of the economy. So, of course, when you look at the tenfold growth, all the actions in the agro-industrialization, tourism development, STI, and oil and gas, the actions in that strategy is actually to improve productivity. Improving productivity. It's not going to happen in 1 year. It's going to be sustained investments in those areas. When you look at what government has been doing over the last 15 years to reduce the cost of doing business, investing in infrastructure, when you actually, in the whole of this country, you can ride on the tarmac road now and go to all the production areas. But however,
except Kampala, but
yeah,
let's continue.
However, we recognize that at a micro level, we still need to do more, and we're doing that more.
Okay.
In terms of the taxation,
yes,
actually, there is a very important initiative to rely on third-party information in terms of integrating databases to identify those people who are not paying taxes in order to broaden the tax base. So that's happening as well. And very soon, the tax base will be much bigger. But in terms of the outlook, we see the outlook being very positive. When we start oil production, it's going to be positive. When you look at the tenfold growth strategy, the strategies we have in the middle sector is going to be positive. When you look at those investments and interventions we're talking about in agriculture, it's going to be positive. In manufacturing, what we need to do here is to raise household incomes through improving productivity in agriculture, but also in scaling up manufacturing and all those things that we're talking about. So I have a very important message here. Let's not be pessimistic. The outlook is very positive. Thank you.
So,
Robert, let's be realistic.
No, on that,
That's all.
yeah. We must have hope. On that optimistic note, please clap for my panel and do it really hard. And I'll ask you guys to resume your seats fairly quickly. I'll also let you know that we are getting very, very close to the coffee break. So you will soon re-energize yourselves. The guys who are online, you go to your kitchen and find a coffee cup. You'll serve yourself, you'll be fine. However, before we get to that point, please allow me to invite the Minister of State for Finance, Minister of State of Finance, Planning and Economic Development, General Duties, Honorable Henry Musasizi, who is also a Member of Parliament. Honorable.
Thank you so much, Robert Kabushenga. I hear now you like it that way. The country director of the World Bank, the country manager of the World Bank, the heads of development partners present, distinguished participants in the audience, ladies and gentlemen, good morning to you all. I am delighted to join you today at this launch of Uganda Economic Update by the World Bank. This report provides an opportunity for us to take stock of our economic performance as a country and how we can chart the best way forward. Uganda's economy has fully recovered. These are the good news now. This is the positive side now. Uganda's economy has fully recovered from a number of shocks, including the COVID-19 pandemic, the increase in global commodity prices, which led to the imported inflation, the effects of climate change, such as droughts and floods. The experience of the COVID-19 strengthened our health systems, and the suspension of new funding from the World Bank has helped to reinforce our resolve to boost our domestic revenue mobilization and to diversify our export markets. In addition, government is implementing the fiscal efficiency measures through our fiscal consolidation agenda and boosted revenue collection as well as borrowing for strategic projects that will accelerate economic growth and socio-economic transformation. Other measures include accountability for tax expenditures and improving the return on public investments, which is currently low. As a result of these measures, the Ugandan economy has strengthened its resilience to both internal and external shocks, and this will strengthen further in the medium term and the long term. So, Mr. Godiba, this is the truth you want to hear. The size of our economy has increased to about $53.2 billion, in financial year 23-24 from $48.8 billion in the previous year. In real terms, the economic growth averages at 6% and is projected to grow further to 6.4% per annum. And when we get into the oil economy, we shall be registering double-digit growth. Therefore, the economic outlook is optimistic and presents opportunities to do even better than we have done in the recent past. To harness these opportunities, the government has put in place the tenfold economic growth strategy of expanding the economy to US dollars 500 billion by the year 2040. I therefore urge the World Bank to partner with us in the realization of this strategic goal. The tenfold growth strategy priorities are agro-industrialization, tourism development, mineral-based industrial development, including oil and gas, and the science, technology, and innovations, what we call the ATMs. To implement this strategy, we will require strong partnership with the private sector and development partners, while the government is strengthening its policies and delivery mechanisms to promote economic diversification and improve private sector efficiency. We do recognize the need to continue investment in infrastructure, health, including the curative and the preventive health, education, providing affordable capital, security enhancement, regional integration, among others. These interventions will continue to be administered as enablers to economic growth in line with the National Development Plan 4 and the tenfold economic growth strategy. At the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development, we are committed to ensuring that economic progress we make is not only sustainable, but also equitable. The recent economic challenges, such as the COVID-19, reminds us that growth must be broad-based. It must reach every corner of our country, benefiting all citizens. To this end, government has continued to implement various wealth creation initiatives, such as the Parish Development Model, EMYOGA, the Youth Livelihood Program, the Presidential Industrial Hubs, and the Women Entrepreneurship Programs, among others. I therefore thank the World Bank Group for supporting the GROW and INVICE projects, which are aligned to these government objectives. I also thank other development partners and stakeholders for supporting government programs despite some challenges that we at times experience in our long-term relationships. Today's launch of the 24th Uganda Economic Update brings attention to something that is equally crucial to Uganda's future: the importance of investing in early childhood development. This annual economic update makes a compelling case that investing in early childhood development is one of the most effective ways to transform human capital in Uganda. And I agree with that assessment. We know that Uganda's long-term prosperity depends on the quality of our human capital. And the foundation of that human capital is laid in the early years of life. By prioritizing early childhood development, we can ensure that our children grow up in nurturing environments where they have the chance to reach their full potential. This will not only lead to improved educational outcomes, but will also contribute to the health, productivity, and overall well-being as we grow older. The government recognizes that investing in early childhood development is not just an investment in the individual child, but an investment in the future of our nation. This report highlights how early childhood interventions can yield significant returns, both for individuals and Uganda as a whole. When we provide children with quality education, health care, nutrition, and protection in these formative years, we are equipping them with the tools they need to thrive and contribute to Uganda's socio-economic transformation. Most significantly, this has the potential to increase the productivity in the economy and at household level for better incomes. Education is a key factor in addressing socio-economic inequality, and quality early childhood development is critical for improved education outcomes. This is why government is prioritizing investment and improved efficiencies in the education sector. Government, through the Ministry of Education and Sports, is making progress through its emphasis on STEM. STEM is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. This is a key step in making our education more aligned to the needs of the country, including industrial development and technological advancement to support innovation. In line with our national priorities, we are taking steps to integrate early childhood development into our broader education and health policies. Indicators such as stunting in children under 5 reduced 26% in 2022 from 29% in 2016. To further support these efforts, the budget allocation for nutrition linked to early childhood development grew by 75.1% in financial year 24-25 to Uganda shillings 9.19 billion compared to Uganda shillings 5.25 billion in financial year 2023-24. In addition, government is working to increase access to early childhood education, improve the quality of early learning environments, and ensure that children receive the care and support they need during their most critical years. As recognized in the update, the approval of the early childhood care and education policy in May 2024 by Cabinet is important for building foundation for quality education, as it encompasses critical phase in children's physical, mental, and psychosocial development for children aged between 0 to 8 years. Early childhood development will therefore require shared responsibility, and we must all work together as government, private sector, civil society, and our international partners to ensure success. The World Bank Economic Update Report has made a number of recommendations. We shall review these recommendations and streamline them in the government programs. I am confident that through our long-term renewed partnership with the World Bank and other stakeholders, some of the recommendations will be implemented through a phased manner, given the current fiscal constraints. As I conclude, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to the World Bank for their continued partnership and their invaluable contribution to the Uganda's development, including through such important research. The insights and recommendations from the report will not only be useful in guiding our policy decisions, but will also serve as a reminder that economic growth must be inclusive and human-centered. We cannot build a strong economy without investing in our human capital, especially our children. The Uganda government looks forward to continued positive collaboration with the World Bank as we implement interventions to accelerate economic growth and social economic transformation. I thank you all for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. And on that note, I will invite everyone to coffee at the end of the room. It is also an opportunity for you to take a break and freshen up. We should be back ready for the next session at 11:30. So you have 20 minutes to get this together. So please grab a coffee or whatever it is you prefer, and let's be back to start at exactly 11:30. The report is ready for downloading. It's on the screen here, so you can download it. If you have your digital device, it's on the screen here. And after the coffee, we resume. I didn't say you have coffee and you go away. Okay, I insist. Now that the country director has sat, the rest of you can't be hanging. You can't be standing up, and in this country we say standing up like a telephone pole. You can't stand. So please take your seats so that we can make the most of the next 2 hours. Okay. For the guys online, please keep the questions coming. Most of them have been for this particular session, and we shall make sure they're all read out and answered by the panel. So now that the most important session has ended, which was food, please allow me to invite Ms. Eleanor Carroll, who is an education economist at the World Bank, and she is going to take us through investing in early childhood development for transformation of human capital in Uganda. Please pay serious attention. This is where the rubber is meeting the road.
Thank you very much, Robert. And thank you, distinguished guests and colleagues. I'm really honored to be presenting on this really important topic here with you today. So, as Robert said, I'm Eleanor. I'm an economist with the World Bank's education team based here in Kampala. And today I'll be presenting on the importance of investing in early childhood education for the transformation of human capital in Uganda. So, first of all, human capital drives prosperity. I believe our country director mentioned earlier that they think as much as 50% of differences of incomes in countries can be attributed to human capital. And we know that education matters for earnings. In fact, in sub-Saharan Africa, each additional year of education is expected to bring an additional 12.5% on average in earnings. And similarly, we know that health impacts GDP. And a 1-year increase in life expectancy is expected to raise a country's GDP by around 4%. Uganda has ambitious development goals and hopes to achieve upper middle income status by 2040. To have a chance at achieving those goals, Uganda must prioritize human capital development. So, as we mentioned in the previous panel, it's a young country, and it's still growing at an annual rate of around 3%. And it's also one of the youngest countries in the world, with 71% of Uganda's population under 30 and 29% under 10. But it has a unique opportunity of reaping a demographic dividend. And what does that mean exactly? Well, it means taking advantage of a shift in a country's population structure to boost economic growth. As birth rates decline and the number of working age people grows relative to dependents, that is children and elderly, you have a unique opportunity. And if these workers are well educated, healthy, and have job opportunities, they become more productive, leading to higher income, economic growth, and improved living standards. Now, for this to happen, countries need serious investments in education, healthcare, and job creation. Otherwise, that opportunity is lost. And as you can see from this graph here, young children are the wide base of Uganda's population pyramid. And the age cohorts from 0 to 9 are the largest. And that means that the 13 million young children of today, they're the future labor force of Uganda's economy. Maybe they'll come work for Robert, our host here in the coffee industry. But Uganda is on the cusp of reaping that demographic dividend. But human capital is low. Currently, the human capital index of Uganda is 0.39. Human capital index, it's a composite measure, and it basically measures how much human capital can a child born today hope to accumulate by age 18. To give you a benchmark, Kenya's score is 0.55, for example. And what it means is that a child born in Uganda today will only reach 39% of their potential in terms of their productivity when they get older, as opposed to if they had complete health and a full education. So currently, investments in education and health are not sufficient to match with Uganda's ambitious development goals. Now, the case for investing early. Early childhood, which is generally defined as the period from conception to 8 years of age, is the most critical period of human brain development, and therefore human capital accumulation. The foundations for cognitive, social, and emotional skills are established early in life, and the achievement of more advanced skills later are based on those skills. And brain development is also subject to a series of sensitive periods when neural circuits are more plastic and primed for learning. And they say, as Mukami mentioned earlier, the first 1,000 days of a child's life is really key here. And this Heckman curve that you see up there, it's really summarizing a very stylized fact from the findings of international literature that investing early yields larger results. And a recent cost-benefit analysis has also shown that for every Ugandan shilling invested in pre-primary education, you could expect a return of 16 Ugandan shillings over time. Now, advancing progress in key ECD outcomes boosts long-term growth. And Uganda has made a lot of progress already. For example, under 5 mortality dropped from 128 per 1,000 live births to 52 in the past 20 years. Now that's a reduction by nearly 60%. Another key indicator that we're seeing progress is stunting. 25 years ago, nearly half of Ugandan children under 5 were stunted. Today, it's about 1 in 4. But we are seeing progress slow down. Findings from modeling indicates that the fraction of children who are not stunted in Uganda will only increase from 74% in 2020 to 83% in 2040 under a business as usual scenario. And we know that stunted children are significantly less productive compared to children who achieve adequate nutrition in early childhood. It's associated with a 22% reduction in earnings. However, by accelerating progress, by investing in health and nutrition services, we could increase the proportion to 93% by 2040. And that's in line with what's required to achieve the Vision 2040 and the tenfold growth strategy. Currently, public expenditure in health and education are too low to support the accelerated human capital development that's needed to meet Uganda's economic aspirations. In education, as you can see here on the graph on the left, in 2021, public spending on education was around 2.7% of GDP, which is a lot lower than regional peers and a lot lower than the internationally agreed benchmarks of 4%. In health, the government spends roughly half that of regional peers. And moreover, partners and private sources cover 85% of spending, roughly, which is not sustainable and also makes the health sector vulnerable to fluctuations in partner support. But it's also not a matter of spending more. It's not only a matter of spending more, but also a matter of spending more efficiently. And pre-primary education is a good example. Uganda's current pre-primary system is a bit fragmented. And there's private providers and faith-based providers, but there's also some unofficial government provision with underage kids going to government schools. So if you look at the first bar in the graph on the right, which shows the age that children are when they first attend primary in Uganda, you'll see that only 52% of Ugandan children are the appropriate age when they start primary, that is 6 or 7. Nearly half are either under or overaged. And we often hear about overaged children and grade repetition, but less attention is given to underage ones. And what we're seeing is basically a workaround system. Due to a lack of affordable options for pre-primary, a lot of parents send their kids to government schools, and government schools have started dividing, in some cases, P1 into P1A and P1B to really separate a little bit kids based on ages. And this is kind of an improvised solution that leads to an enrollment bulge in P1. And the mix of underage and overage students leads to overcrowding in classroom, it strains resources, and it really lowers the quality of education, because a child that's, age 4 and a child that's age 7, they don't have the same developmental needs. And without proper primary education, many children enter P1 unprepared, leading to high repetition rates, meaning that the government ends up paying multiple times for the same kids to go through the same grade. So that's not very efficient. But it's not just about pre-primary, it's also about affordable childcare for the youngest. We know that Uganda really needs access to affordable childcare. We know that it can boost women's labor force participation. It can also be really a win-win for both parents, for businesses, and for the children themselves. So we recently linked to some of our work under the GROW project. I see my colleague Serena here. We've done some studies on childcare. And one of the studies that we did together with nearly 200 low-income women entrepreneurs in Kampala and Wakiso districts found that only 22% of participants used formal childcare services. Most women children brought their child to work, and that makes them less productive, or in some cases, leaving the child at home, which can also be detrimental to child development. But of those without childcare support, 70% of participants cited affordability as the key barrier. And nearly all of the women without childcare support expressed an interest in using affordable services, stating a willingness to pay between 50,000 Ugandan shilling and 100,000 Ugandan shilling per month. Meanwhile, the women who are using childcare reported paying on average 115 Ugandan shilling per month. While that's unsustainable with their current level of income, it shows that the gap between willingness to pay and cost of childcare is not unsurmountable. A voucher or a subsidy could increase intake, providing benefits to both parents, children, and businesses. Now, that leads me to some of our key recommendations. First of all, this report recommends that we commit to increasing expenditure on ECD. As I hope we've shown with some of the evidence in this presentation, it's a good deal. A 2 percentage point increase in human capital expenditure could increase average annual GDP growth by 1.5 percentage points by the end of the decade. Second, create incentives for quality service delivery. For example, that could mean incorporating ECD service delivery indicators into the performance-based formula for local governments. It could give local governments incentives to expand access and improve quality. And government could also include more ECD targets in the national development planning for better visibility. And then it's also, of course, key to invest in systems that track and monitor these indicators over time. And finally, workforce development for ECD should be a priority. And that means implementing staffing norms and professional development in primary healthcare, training teachers to meet the developmental needs of pre-primary age children, and establishing qualifications for childcare providers with minimum requirements. So, in line with these recommendations, we have we highlight 4 investment priorities in this report. The first one is expanding primary healthcare and nutrition services. While there's been a lot of improvements in maternal and child health, it's still the case that rural and low-income families, they really have barriers to accessing basic care. So that would be a costly investment, but it's really essential for long-term impact. Uganda's health budget could be, if it's increased from, say, 8% to 12% over 6 years, that could really free up $1 billion annually for that expansion. And part of that could be covered by the strong economic growth that we're seeing and heard about from my colleagues in the previous panel. But it could also be coming from taxing unhealthy products like alcohol and tobacco. Investment priority number 2 is financing 1 year of pre-primary education through government schools. We've seen really successful cases in Ethiopia, for example, where they've introduced that for 5-year-olds. And a recent cost-benefit analysis from UNICEF showed that the cost of inaction is huge. By not investing in pre-primary, Uganda risks losing out on $45 billion over the next couple decades. Investment priority number 3 is to scale up homegrown and evidence-based parenting and violence prevention programs. Now, Uganda currently lacks implementation of those kind of programs, but there is a lot of interesting pilots going on, and there's been some programs that have had really good effects, and it would be key to introduce those at a larger scale. And the final and 4th investment priority is to develop affordable childcare options, especially for low-income women with children under 3. Expansion should really prioritize models that serve large populations and disadvantaged households. And there's a lot of things that government can do to increase uptake here. It could be incentives like startup grants or tax breaks for private providers. They could also provide access to vouchers, public partnerships. There's a lot of successful models that we've seen around the region that Uganda could really benefit from investing in. And as I mentioned, there is willingness to pay. The demand for parents is there. It's just a matter about helping it along a little bit with the right incentives from government. Now, thank you. Thank you very much. That wraps up my presentation, and I'll hand that over to Robert.
Thank you very much, Eleanor. That's food for thought. Really, really important food for thought. For those of you who may not know, there was once a president in this country called Idi Amin. Some of you may know him, some of you may not know him. But that's when people like me, Godba, Robert, Okudi, that's why we are called Amin era kids. That's when we grew up. So one morning they would put an announcement on radio. Mothers, take your children for immunization. Anybody who doesn't go for immunization, finished. So my mother would run home panicking. They said, we go for immunization. All of you didn't know why you were going, but you could see she was scared of the government. Sometimes I wish we would go back to those days. Another thing you didn't know is to be pregnant on a village, you had to go to the hospital to drink medicine. If you didn't go, you were not allowed to carry the pregnancy. So those are the measures. Sabrina is laughing. So you know what those measures were for. So I think we're going to have an interesting, that's why some of us are here. Otherwise, I don't think we would have lived this long if those hard measures hadn't been taken. There used to be a program on Radio Uganda. There used to be a radio called Radio Uganda. And they would teach women how to give their children a balanced diet, as they used to call it. Well, it turned out to be very simple foods. So I think it's time for us to hear the perspectives of people who understand these issues better. Of course, we can't go back to the days of by force, but at least we can make a difference, whether it's parenting, education, or nutrition, as things have been shown. So, first person who must come back here is Eleanor. You must come back, because there might be, I did say that earlier on for Silva, and he ended up having to answer quite a few questions. I'm sure there will be questions for you. Please take a seat. Dr. Mary Goretti Nakabugo. Please join the stage, Executive Director of Uwezo. If there's anybody who knows something about the education path, it's her. So she's our authority in this country on those matters. Why aren't you Minister of Education? Sorry, I was joking. Right. Mukami, I must disclose something. So I am twisted your people to allow me to come with my son. And my son is an example of why this investment must be made. Sabrina was his pediatrician. So for me, I was already investing early in pediatrics. He was well fed. If you see him, he's not a small man. So my point is, there is an example of what that investment can make. So on that note, let me invite my family pediatrician, Dr. Sabrina Chitaka, who is a senior lecturer, the Department of Pediatrics and Child Health at Makerere University. Is Nada here? Where is she? Why are you hiding? Big people sit in front. Please welcome Nada. Ms. Nada Elata, who is the Early Childhood Development Manager at UNICEF. Right. So then we've got, so between Robert and Hajat, you decide who is going to represent the PS. I'm not going to appoint. Please pass by here, near me here, because I need to consult you on some serious political matter, which. Yes. I was consulting on what her office is, whether she has already been promoted, but Dr. Safina Mutumba, who is the head principal education officer, early childhood. Yes. Bernard, I think I have finally redeemed myself. The panel is now a womano, so now we are complete. Right, so the first one really before we go into the real hardcore policy conversations, and I want to start with you, Sabrina. Just purely from a biological, as crude way as I can put it, perspective, why is it crucially important to invest in that development? So an early childhood here, I guess, means from 0 to about 3, 4, 5. I don't know what the age bracket is, but just help us to understand as a question of questions, why is it so important for children at that stage, for our country's children to be invested in? We all hear about infant mortality, stunting, and all of this. Why is it so important for us to resolve those issues early?
Well, thank you very much. It's a great honor for me to be part of this great panel, but also at a time when we are talking about early childhood development and early childhood learning. And for me as a pediatrician, I usually say that life begins even before you start having that life. It begins 2 months before a woman becomes pregnant. And that means a lot, that a woman should be ready to have that baby, that a woman should have enough stores on her iron, on her zinc, on her selenium, before she even becomes pregnant. And that she should plan for that baby, her and her partner. That's very important. Because as we talk about early childhood development, it's the first 1,000 days that really matter. A brain of a person starts to develop at 6 weeks of life, in utero. And imagine if mom hasn't loaded up on magnesium, on selenium, on the minerals that actually contribute to that brain development, then the baby that is going to be born is not going to be a healthy baby.
Wow.
As that child grows, it becomes even more critical for that child to start learning between 0 and 3 years, because that's the critical time when the brain starts to develop. So as we talk about early childhood learning, we need to think critically about what food is this child eating? What food is the mom eating to enable the brain to grow to its maximum capacity? I know that by age 5, the brain has fully grown, and it weighs about maybe 1 kilogram, with girls' brains being a little bit heavier than boys' brains.
Oh.
And eventually...
Now I have understood it. Okay.
Yes. So I think that it's so important for whether it's formal or informal training to happen right from the time the baby is born. For a mom talking to that baby, showing them colors, decorating the nursery, and later on, teaching them words and also teaching them numbers.
So I guess what you're telling us is that the investment in this early childhood development must also take into account the mother. Investment in ability of, I'm sure you remember the recent controversy about young pregnancies, during COVID and all those issues. So we need to look at investing there as well.
Correct.
Right. So, Dr. Safina, there is some, what they call them, acronyms I'm seeing. So I want you to help me understand them. ECD, ECCE, policy, all of these things. Just help us to understand what are some of the gains, progress that you've made in this area. Just press the button, that should be fine. That you would say have taken place from your perspective with respect to early childhood development. What have you been able to achieve?
Yeah, thank you very much. We have the acronyms ECD and ECCE. ECD is early childhood development, and it looks at the holistic period of the child's growth, as Dr. Sabrina has explained, right before conception, throughout conception, and including early learning and stimulation up to the period of 8 years.
Okay.
Whereas ECCE, that is early childhood care and education, majorly relates to early learning and stimulation. However, the second C, which brings out the care aspect, still looks at that holistic component of it, in spite of the provision of early learning. And what government has done to begin with, we came up with a comprehensive national integrated ECD policy, which is housed under Ministry of Gender because of their holistic approach. They cater for the old, the youth, the young, the mothers. So they have to take lead in coordinating that full package. And as the previous speakers, when it comes to early childhood care and education, the National Integrated ECD Policy framework mandates Ministry of Education and Sports to handle the component of early childhood care and education to ensure that we continue with that holistic component under the care, nutrition, health, early learning and stimulation, and safety and protection of the child. And as informed you that last year, on 14th May, the cabinet approved that ECCE policy. And when you look at its 5 strategies, you realize that it covers the holistic package. The challenge comes in on implementation.
If I was to give you $1 million today, and if you talk to me well, I can give it. What would be your priority areas to invest in that's the area you've described where the policy has shaped? Where should we be focusing?
First of all, as explained, that we need to look at that holistic nature of child development, and ECD is not a one man's responsibility. So what we would focus at, I'll give you the 5 strategies areas where we would need that money to be directed to. First of all, it should focus at increasing equitable access to quality, inclusive, and sustainable ECCE services in the country. Secondly, we have a number of structures that deliver ECD services, so I would look at strengthening the structures and systems for effective standardization and management of ECCE service delivery. Then there is also need to increase public awareness on ECCE programs and promotion of appropriate partnerships, being that we don't work alone as Minister of Education. with parents, guardians, so that each of us can play our role in the delivery of ECCE services. We have the communities and civil society organizations because we are already working with them currently. And also to increase the capacity of the Ministry of Education officers and local governments, because we are the major overseers, coordinators, and who have to cause collaboration to ensure that the children receive the best services. We need to look at, guide on implementation, coordinate, monitor, evaluate, regulate, and promote quality, relevant, and affordable ECCE services to mitigate the divide among its stakeholders. Then finally, we have been having a gap. Therefore, we need to look at mainstreaming cross-cutting issues to ensure that children with disability are supported right from the word go, so that they can also get a best start in life. We need to look at the gender-related issues, because currently there is a misconception. Whenever people hear the word gender, they run straight away to the girls. I remember during this holiday, my son, he is a senior 6 Vakis, he asked, "Mommy, why is it that you're pushing a lot on girls and ignoring us?" An implication that we need to understand the component of gender. Then we need to also introduce technology and ICT to enable our staff to benchmark on other people that are doing it well. Health issues, related issues, HIV, it does not happen when these children are adult. It begins right from the word go, because some of these children are born with the HIV and all those other components that fall under the cross-cutting issues. So those are the 5 strategies I would mobilize resources for, to ensure that our children receive a best start in life, but not forgetting the parents, because at the end of the day, there are services that children receive indirectly through their parents. Thank you.
Let me look for my $1 million. Goretti, how do you think, I mean, you've been familiar with the whole education landscape and the initiatives that have taken place. What else, what are the most critical policy changes you think still need to be made? That's one. And two, to enhance ECD. 2, how can they be effectively implemented? Because I also get the sense that the ECD has been left to private operators and parents, and that's it. So, although some of it is then postponed until P1 when government comes in. So, do you want to talk about what you think could be done better under those circumstances?
Much, Robert, and thank you very much, everyone here. First of all, it's very exciting that the economic update for today chose to focus on such an important issue of ECD, because if we only focus on primary education or basic education in its current state, it would be a disaster, because at the moment, primary education is purely inefficiently delivered. If you look at learning outcomes, for example, there's a lot of non-learning. Our own assessments in Uwezo have over the years indicated that even after going 3 years of primary education, you hardly have 10% of children who are able to read and understand a primary 2 level text. Even when they have completed 5 years of primary education, our assessment of 2021 indicated about 52% couldn't read at primary 2 level. Things are not really improved.
What were they doing in school?
Yeah, ask me. So, and things are quite, I mean, we are about to launch a report of the assessment that we did last year. We are launching it on the 18th of March.
But you still for us.
And things have actually worsened. partly because I think of the closure, the COVID-19 closure. So unless we start investing in these strong foundations, it becomes quite difficult. If you look at the wastage, I think my colleague here has already elaborated on those, the transition rates or the repetitions. If you look at UBOS 2021 abstracts, it shows that if you have 100 children registering or being admitted in primary 1, by primary 7, those transitioning from primary 7 to senior 1, you have about 69%, 70%. Sorry, 30%. So 70% wastage. So at every level you are losing.
So of all the 100 children who turn up in P1,
only 30.
Only 30 go to secondary school.
Yes, they get admitted. So by senior 6, you only have about 12%. So 12 out of 100. So there is wastage at every stage. And actually, among others, really, it's because many of them don't have the foundations to start with. Because miracles are not going to happen later on. So if they cannot read by primary 3, remember you are continuing to transition them primary for their reading more complex material. They can't read at primary 2. You can't expect them to read primary 5 material, for example. And the higher they go, they don't have the foundations to actually learn better. So we appreciate the recommendations that have been said here, but to add on those ones, we celebrate the the approval of the ECCE policy last year, but also the Education Policy Review Commission has recommended a new structure for primary education to make a mandatory 1 year of ECE, and then 6 years of primary and ETC. We need to move from paper to implementation, because even when you have the 1 year without considering the quality of what is being taught there, it might be more of the same.
But Goretti, you've been in this sector.
Yes.
What are some of the quick wins where that hypothetical $1 million that I have can go to, in terms of saying, if this money was put in this activity, that activity, we would have an immediate impact? So for instance, how do you make 1 year of being in ECCE in a primary school workable?
Yeah.
Teachers, facilities, what should happen in actual money being paid?
Thank you very much. I think, again, the report already makes a little bit of this recommendation. I believe government on its own, if you told government or Minister of Education to go and roll out this 1 year of ECD, as per the recommendation of the Education Policy Review Commission, to be honest, they don't have that capacity.
Right.
So what is going to happen and to push this to be implemented is that partnership between the private providers, the community-based ECDs, and so on.
So
we are looking at
religious organizations.
Religious organizations. We are looking at a situation where maybe government might have the resources to establish this one class of ECD, or convert the current P1 to ECD. By the way, it has been quite ineffective in some countries, really. So the most effective ECD has happened outside the primary education. So you want to kind of support the existing structures, which, and many of them, almost 100%, are actually at the moment, before the implementation of the policy. You have the class 1B, which has been attached informally to the primary schools, but largely the many private providers of ECD, you kind of want to start with those ones and maybe give them a subsidy to be able to subsidize the poor families or households to be able to afford. Recently, or last year actually, we did do some research in community-based preschools in 2 districts only. It was a qualitative study. And we saw the value that these community-based preschools can actually add at a very, very low cost. Maybe if you added, it might be sound very little, but maybe to government it's a lot. If you added like 50,000 shillings to these community, per child, to the community-based preschools, they could maybe expand the access.
So a PDM of ECD.
Yes, yes. Actually, that was the second thing. Looking at the PDM, can ECD become one of the components actually that they look at? The third one is on the training of the human resource.
Yes.
We're talking about ECD in the context where also the teacher policy has been introduced, demanding that teachers at all levels should have degrees, diplomas to start with.
Why?
We don't have that human resource at the moment at ECD, honestly. You might want to lower a little bit of the qualification for the ECDs, but train them aggressively to acquire the pedagogy that is required for this level.
But
sorry.
No, because you raise now, what about the cultural challenges in which these young children are raised? Will you have the relevant instruction? Even if you took it from purely a religious point of view, if the ECD is being provided by a religious institution, how do you put requirements?
I think the Ministry of Education, where my colleague Safina comes from.
I'll come back to her. But I want to step back a little bit.
Yes.
And the first part of the question is for Sabrina, and then Nada will combine the two. And I'll tell you how you will help me combine them. Sabrina, let's step back. What Goretti is describing is children who are healthy enough and have arrived at school. That's what she's talking about. Where do we invest from a health standpoint to make sure that actually the child can leave home, if the school is within walking distance, can walk to the school, or can sit in a 3 to 4 hour instruction? What are the things that, from a health standpoint, early years and then going into school, what do we need to put in place from a health standpoint?
Oh, thank you very much, Robert, for that great question. First of all, I need people to understand that globally, only 4 out of 10 children aged 3 to 4 have had early childhood development.
Repeat.
4 out of 10 children globally have had early childhood development between the age of 3 and 4.
Okay, now let me just take you back a bit. Can you just tick off the indicators of early childhood development so that you say, when you tick all these boxes, you pass being developed?
So when people undergo early childhood development, it means that they are being taught how to read, how to write, and how to count numbers.
Right.
And unfortunately, in sub-Saharan Africa, only 1 out of 4 children between the age of 3 and 4 have had early childhood development.
Wow.
In Uganda, and just to ride on what Dr. Goretti said, very few children undergo early childhood development. And this is offered by the rich people who take their children to primary schools. There's a lot of benefit to take a child to a formal education when they are 3 to 4 years of age, because they start off on a better footing, because they then learn how to read and write, and they are more efficient when they grow up.
Okay.
While in school, it is so critical for the child to be taken care of by teachers who love them, who are compassionate, and who support them. You don't want your child landing in a class, whether they are 3 or 4 or 6 years, landing in a class where a teacher is abusive, landing in a class where there is no food, landing in a class where the child is extremely stressed. And that's where the education of these providers comes in, and standardization of these early childhood learning centers. We don't want to throw our kids...
What Safina was describing as their regulatory role, we need to invest money in there. And
in fact, not only to do investment in the money and the provision, but also to ensure that these children are not traumatized while they are at school. I bring in the aspect of trauma because if a child is traumatized maybe by a teacher who's not compassionate, who has not been taught psychology, support and care for a child, this child is going to be traumatized for life. And there's something called transgenerational epigenetics,
Okay,
which for me,
in English,
in
what-
English
what-
meaning that if a child's brain is traumatized while they are little, they are going to suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. And this will be passed on 3 generations to come. So even as we plan to support and encourage our babies to go to school early, we must make sure that the educators, the people who teach them, are well trained. Otherwise, we are going to hear of teachers who are frustrated with children who are slow learners, maybe, of children who may not be able to learn at a fast pace. They need to be trained how to train these young learners. And that's when we shall get benefit. There's no point in taking children to school when they are going to feed on a cup of porridge the whole day. That's not a balanced diet. Remember, their brains are still growing. And so we must make it holistic in a way that as we push these learners to go to school, there should be safety, there should be adequate feeding. And remember, these children below the age of 5, they need to feed every 2 hours, ideally, and feed on a balanced diet.
I'm laughing because in my time,
You would feed once a day, Robert. So I think it's a whole balance of everyone coming in to support.
So Sabrina, I just want to see that I understand your argument correct. That actually, more than anything else, what I'll call the infrastructure of ECD is where public investment would make a great deal of sense. And by that infrastructure, I mean, one, the types of investment in the people who are to provide this ECD.
Most importantly.
Yes, they're properly trained. 2, they're supervised and regulated.
Correct.
To be able to care before we even think of just flooding these places with children. Wow. Nada. Now, so Nada, I really think because you work for UNICEF, and that's an interesting place where you've got all these varied experiences, particularly with children. What's your perspective, particularly on the issue of, one, their care and education, but also prior to that, are they healthy enough? What needs to be done to make sure that when the Ugandan child arrives in the ECCE environment, they're actually really ready to benefit from it?
Thank you so much for that question. I'll try to add to what has been presented because I think we've had a lot of great interventions. I also just want to say thank you, and it's an honor to be here on this panel. So I want to just flag a few things. For UNICEF, we define early childhood development as an outcome. It's actually an outcome of the interaction between a child and their environment. And it's, of course, as was mentioned, multi-sectoral in nature. So we're looking at health, nutrition, safety, security, opportunities for early learning, and also the nurturing care or the support that children get from their primary caregivers, their parents, and other adults in their life. So I just wanted to put that as sort of a foundation for my talking points.
Yeah.
I think when we look at Uganda's statistics, there has definitely been efforts and progress, and I think we commend the government for passing the ECCE policy. Having a policy in place is essential and very important, and I can see other countries in our region, looking and trying to emulate that. But again, the policy, and I think Safina and others will agree with me, the policy is just as good as paper if we don't implement it the way that it should be. So that's, I think, where we need to focus our efforts. Now, when we look at the statistics for Uganda, when we look at the Demographic and Health Survey of 2022, the Uganda DHS 2022, and you look at the ECD index, the index is an indicator really that measures children's holistic development. When you look, you see an average of about 55, I think, % of children developmentally on track between the ages of 2 to 5. However, when you break that down into the different age brackets, you further disaggregate it. I'm speaking English, hopefully in a way everybody can comprehend. So between 2 to 3 years, they're 70% developmentally on track. when you look at 3 to 4, they're 50% developmentally on track. And then 4 to 5, sadly, they're 30% developmentally on track, which actually means that as they're aging, there could be a level of, regression, as they're getting ready to enter pre-primary education. We have to look at the data a little more closely, but that is a stark difference between, the age of 2 to the age of 5. So for me, I think looking at that information is very important, trying to understand what is happening. We can take guesses, but I think we need to do a little more work in that area to see what's happening. Are they starting off with good nutrition and healthy when they're younger? They're not maybe exposed so much to the pre-literacy, pre-numeracy, and then as they need that stimulation to enter preschool, are they not getting those pre-literacy, pre-numeracy, and numeracy and literacy skills that they need? So what is happening there, I think, is very important to look at a little more closely. Mm-hmm. And then I want to answer, you didn't direct this question to me, but I want to give you a response.
You are most welcome.
So you asked for, even without $1 million, okay? There are things that I think can be done without $1 million. And we've been talking with Hajja Safina and the ministry about these things. So first, we have the underage enrollment in primary 1. We know that that exists. It's in the National Planning Authority report. I think it was 2019, Safina, I think. It's clear. I think we cannot, negate that. Mm-hmm. From where we stand, and I think many people hopefully would agree, is if as the Education Act, as we're looking at the Education Act, if there can be advocacy and support for provision of public sector support, then I think we have an immediate win, because you can take those.
How do you mean public sector support? What
so
exactly?
If government can say that it's okay for government to do direct provision, then those underage children, or government to provide service directly, it doesn't have to provide all of it, but to at least say we are okay to begin to provide this service, then you can have some quick fixes within the system.
So this would be, just following on to your suggestion, it would be at the existing school, and all you're doing.
That's what. There's no one size fits all for Uganda, but for many other countries as well. So that would be one of the things that can be done, and you don't really need much in terms of resources to get that done. Now, of course, scaling up access, etc., you need coordinated investments. You need donors to also come in a coordinated manner to support. I think that we have definitely suffered from that in Uganda with, maybe overinvestment in some districts and underinvestment in others, etc. So there are multiple components and multiple layers to the solution.
In response to what you just said, there's one or two questions I want to come to, but I don't want to leave this because in my current life, I've witnessed the situation you're describing, and I want to put this to both Goretti and Safina. The cultural realities and the economic realities, especially in the rural areas. So I have women who come to work on my farm, but they can't leave their children at home. So when they come with their children to my farm, I'm sure Nada there will say I am engaging in child labor. But there is another incentive at my farm which is not there at home, which is food, because I provide food. So I provide breakfast, lunch, then they go home. So part of the reason these children are going early to school is because their siblings have gone to school, the mothers need to work, the fathers have gone off as labor. Is this something that Goretti, for you, we should push, that at existing institutions today, the primary school institutions, we make a provision for underage children in ECD, or whatever, I think in my time we used to call it nursery school, and provide the teachers? From your side, Safina, what kind of pressure would that put on the resources available to do that? So between the two of you, who wants to go first? Goretti, you shoot, then Safina will.
Mother Ministry would come last.
Yeah.
So I think what you're asking actually is basically what the Education Policy Review Commission is recommending in the report that early this year they submitted to the Minister of Education, is to provide 1 year of pre-primary, then 6 years of primary. Of course, you are now releasing some resources from P7 to.
But does that really
build
solve the
strong-
problem? Because
Sorry?
it doesn't solve the problem. It's still P1.
Oh, yeah. No. It is going to be classified as pre-primary.
Pre-primary, okay.
Yes, pre-primary. But what that does is that it is starting at year 5. So you are not catering for the 3
0
to
to
4
4.
years. 0 to 4, but when we're talking about the ECCE, we're talking about 3, because the current pre-primary is 3 to 5 years.
Okay.
So the 3 years. So what government is offering to give is from 5. So I think that is already a good start.
It's a progress.
It's a progress made, but you also need to now also support the private providers who are catering for, of course, many of them are going to still continue providing for 3 to 5, but at least you are catering for them who are providing for 3 to 4, such that if a parent wants them to transition from those private providers to push them to a government school where already the 5 years are catered for, then already you are doing something. So for us, what we are pushing is, can we also, much as government is providing for this 1 year, can we also build on the strength of already existing structures by the private providers and maybe give them a subsidy? Because at the moment, very few parents can afford because of the cost. So if you give these private providers some kind of a subsidy, then they will subsidize the low-income earners, the households. Secondly, I think, yes, it's okay for government to take this up, but the issue of quality is extremely important. One of the differences why children who have gone to preschool are at an advantage than those who have not gone to school, if you look at the context in which the preschool is now provided, you have smaller classes, you have the baby, middle, upper. They are really smaller classes, 25, 30 children. So the teacher is able to interact. Go to our government school, P1, 100 children, 200 children.
It is a public rally.
Yes, if that is the same quality that we are going to provide to this 1 year pre-primary,
by the way,
it is not going to help.
It continues to Makerere University.
Oh, yeah.
So, but to you, Safina, there was also the specific suggestion of integrating an ECD financing element in PDM. So, for instance, if there is a school in the area with ECD provision, whether it's a Sunday school or a madrasa or whatever it is, you say, I will pay 25,000 for an extra child you take on. You just tell, is that something you want to consider? I'm now looking at 2 to 5, because you've solved 5, but 2 to 5.
Thank you very much. I will respond to the questions in 2 dimensions, both as a ministry official and as a researcher. To begin with, building on what Dr. Goretti has submitted on the issue of subsidies, I think the government is already, in one way or another, giving subsidies to the private schools. For instance, we develop the legal frameworks. We don't sell to them all those books. We give them out free of charge under the courtesy and support of UNICEF. Then secondly, I will come back to the issue of the 1 year program. Research under USAID and the UEU 24th edition has highlighted the P1B issue, an implication that they are underage, below 6 years in government premises, whereby those children already accommodated in infrastructures that have already been provided by government. an implication that if we are to take on the one class, we can begin small. Half a loaf is better than none. Then those children already have teachers handling them. We shall retool those teachers to give them a package on how to manage pre-primary learners. Then government has already started on the strategy of training pre-primary teachers. So that is already a win.
Okay.
If we are to take it up, we shall, in one way or another, make use of those teachers that have been trained. Then under
I hope the training element there takes into consideration the issues Sabrina was raising.
Of course, yes. For
Because-
example, myself, I'm an ECD specialist and I'm a teacher.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because
then under the PDM.
for us, the trauma we went through in the early days, it's a wonder we are still alive. Some of the teachers were village terrors, so I hope, you know.
Of course, we
Yeah.
have policies for ECD, and under the policy position, we have developed ECC specific basic requirements and minimum standards.
Okay.
And the ECCE policy is very clear that ECCE services should be delivered independently from other levels.
Okay.
An implication that if we are to introduce ECD services at the government premises, this will not be part of primary, but it will be a stand-alone on one way or another.
If there's a private provider who has both ECD and upper, you enforce the separation.
Of course, it's what we have been doing because the ECCE premises are registered independently from the primary.
Yeah.
Then under the PDM, the fourth pillar, that is the social services pillar, we have developed the social services pillar manual, which has highlighted on a part on the delivery of ECCE services, and we are advocating for an ECD center in every village, this time not at the parish as of the primary school. And in that aspect, we are trying to mobilize the PDM heads so that through the faith-based organizations, communities can organize themselves to also receive some funding to establish community-based ECD centers, which will continuously be monitored and supported by the Ministry of Education and Sports.
That one we shall pray that you succeed, because then half the problem will be solved. So the next question, really, this is for both Nada and Eleanor. I know you're shocked, but I have to ask this to you, because you, Eleanor, is the education economist, and Nada, you've been, while you're a child specialist, in your organization, you're at the center of putting together resources to support this. And the question is, how can we bring together the key stakeholders, you know, development partners, government, private sector players, communities, whether they're religious-based or other forms of organization? How can, especially sometimes there's a skepticism or lack of trust, how do you and who should mobilize these groups to, what model can we use to effectively get these resources to be channeled? I guess we already have an existing model, like some of the interventions around HIV/AIDS, some of the interventions we had around COVID. How can we use those as a mobilizational element? Who wants to go first? Nada, you've been handed here.
So I'm just smiling because I think actually some of this work is already starting. So we're not starting from scratch in this area. You know, just a few weeks ago, we had a meeting with a group, really it's an alliance called the Bright Start Alliance. And it was a small group led by government with UNICEF and a few other partners, just discussing the financing, you know, environment and funders committing to wanting to be part of this alliance as a starting point to say we are willing to coordinate and include some of the bigger funders within Uganda who are supporting ECD and ECCE services. So I think first of all, having a costed plan is very important. We have the National Integrated ECD costed strategic plan,
Right.
and ECCE costed strategy is critical. And then understanding where the gaps are and having a combination of public-private partnership commitment to filling that gap.
Right.
It's not all about funding. That is a part of it, but there are, as Eleanor mentioned earlier, there are efficiencies in the system that we need to identify, that we have identified, and we need to address. I would even say, let us start there, with being efficient and then looking at where we have gaps and raising resources to fill those gaps. There is one I just want to add, because I want to add one thing to what Hajat Safina mentioned. Also on the primary one, training of teachers with underage children, I also want to emphasize this is not something that is not started. This is something that has started in Karamoja, actually, with the UNICEF support and working with the local government and central government on developing a training package or training. It's more than a manual, it's a package and a methodology to retrain primary one teachers who have underage children in their classes to teach at the right level. Again, government is already paying their salaries, so it's important that even in the meantime, even if these children are still counted as primary one, that they are being taught at the right level. And so far it's shown success, and we're hoping that that can be a model that can be emulated and used in other parts of the country as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think Nara did a great job of answering that question, but let me try and add on a few points as well. I mean, I think in order to coordinate better, I think a lot of things have already happened, right? There's been a lot of policy wins. The ECC policy, the Secretariat established, there is movement in this sector. But I think there's definitely a role for development partners to step up and see what we can do in terms of really leveraging successful existing models. There are a lot of private providers out there. We can work with vouchers, other types of incentives to create something here. I think, and as Nada mentioned about efficiencies, 16% of the kids who are currently in P1 are already being, they're already underage, so they're being provided for by government. But we can invest more efficiently, because teaching a 4-year-old something that is appropriate for a 7-year-old is not the best way to invest. And in addition, we talked a little bit, Dr. Goretti mentioned low learning outcomes. Like 8 out of 10 Ugandan kids cannot read by age 10. They cannot read a simple paragraph. Why is it that learning levels are so low? Well, part of it is that kids are not arriving at school ready to learn. But with pre-primary education, they would be more ready to actually learn when they get to primary. And therefore, we will reduce grade repetition. We don't have to pay for the same kid.
To trigger the women here to say something, and they completely refused. So I gave you coffee, so that should be enough incentive. But I'll put in another incentive. If you come through with a significant contribution on the microphone, you will be the first person at lunch. Okay, now that response is good. So when we finish here, there will be lunch, but we will be looking, and we're making notes. Who asked, who didn't ask, so the coupon will... All right, so question time. Who has... I'm now completely refusing to notice any man's hand until... Yes. Where's the mic? We would like a balanced... She's right. The mic is right there. Introduce yourself and let us know what you... Is that mic working?
Thank you and good morning.
We have passed.
Good afternoon, sorry. My name is Immaculate Nakanjako from the Alliance Foundation. I'd like to appreciate the World Bank for pushing for this. It's long overdue, but I'm glad we are not late to this. But also, to the ECD actors in the room, this is another win for us. So thank you for that. I don't have a question, Robert. I'm just saving the men who want to ask questions.
That's fine.
Yeah. However, I'd love to say that.
I didn't know there was an ECD foundation in Uganda, so I've just learned a powerful lesson. Yeah. So
For everybody in the room, with all the knowledge that we are gathering today and that we are finding out right now, advocating for investing in early childhood, how are we moving going forward? How are we doing our programming? Are we going to involve a component of early childhood, knowing that it is important for the human capital development in this country? It doesn't matter whether you're a manufacturer, do you have a place where the women in your organization, in your manufacturing plant can leave their young children? It doesn't matter who you are or what you are doing in terms of economic development for Uganda. Going forward, how is your programming going to involve a component of early childhood as we wait for the government to come on board and as we wait for other actors also? Thank you.
The ladies, you're still, I've refused to notice the men, so I'll just recast that question to you, Goretti, because you are in that area, and anyone else on the panel is to advise how should they reprogram. She's asked generally, but how should they reprogram? Is there an answer? Okay, any more? Okay, there's a lady here in black. When you put up your hand, I first look at your chest. Right.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Manuela Mlondo here, president of the Earliest Foundation, but also here as in the private sector under the cradle. How can we, the private sector, help? I know that's a hard question to ask because we are the ones who are holding the entire sector. But how can we help? How can we increase efforts to assist government and everything that we're doing here? But also, secondly, how can the government help us?
Okay.
So it's a two-pronged question, and I'm hoping that it can help those of us who are here. And I have another private sector person here.
Give her the microphone. Yes.
Thank you so
now
much.
We are moving. Now we are.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon. My name is Shamim Nirere from Izere Education. This question is for Dr. Mary Goretti and specifically to Wezo. You've done a good job to show us that our children are not learning, the learning outcomes are really low in districts. I would like to ask that could you consider, or maybe you'd be doing this, I don't know, could you consider running a district index to see which district is improving in specific outcomes, so that we can even have government or private sectors, like UNICEF, rewarding districts that are doing so much in giving us improvements, measurable improvements, so that we do not have the same districts performing poorly, learning outcomes are low, children are dropping out, PLE results are really bad, yet there are also other districts that are doing some work on ground level. So let's task local government to handle some of these things, and let's put it publicly and question these local councils. What are you doing in your district to ensure that these three outcomes are achieved? I think Owezo can do a great deal in that department because you've really given us so much data about what is on ground. Thank you very much to everybody.
Okay. Is there any other lady? I will not dilute. You please. I told you. So we are moving. Yes, please.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm called Rebecca Pio, and I'm from Lira. I like the idea of the 4 investment priorities, especially the scaling up of the homegrown and evidence-based parenting, and then violence prevention program. But I've heard a lot about, putting input on the children, the teachers. How about the parents? If we're talking about stopping violence at that level, what are we doing for the parents? Thank you.
I am not going to dilute the intervention of the ladies by allowing a man to I will not use any of the two words I was thinking of. I don't want it diluted. So I'll come back to the panel. Please respond to those issues. I'm sure on the trauma side and how parents can help, maybe we start with Sabrina and Nada, and then I guess if all of you can engage with it. So you've had the questions. Please start.
So I could talk about parenting and parents for a very, very long time because I deal with children and parents on a daily basis as a pediatrician. However, I'd like to say that when parents value early childhood development and training, then they are more likely to send their children early to school. And the outcomes of a child who goes to school early are very, very clear. I know that Robert did not tell everyone, but his son who's here, who's going to be an economist, started school at 1 year and 4 months. And personally, I started school at 2.5 years. And it's evident that I stayed in school, I succeeded, my children are successful. So every parent should deserve the right and opportunity to send their children to school. It all starts with the parents. It starts with parents planning to have those children. And if parents are not present, then there's lack of connectedness. And lack of connectedness starts very early on with absentee fathers, with absent mothers, with parents not being present to parent and nurture those children. And when we send our children to school, the connections should not stop. We should not send our children to school saying, oh, I've sent them to the teacher to groom them. Those teachers are not the parents. We are the parents. And we should continually nurture and be present, even in school functions and being present there for the child as they grow. As I said earlier in my early submission, that parenting starts from the day you plan to have a baby. Even the timing of that pregnancy should be planned for. Whether you're having a baby in August, who will be a happy baby, or you're having a baby on Valentine's Day, that's absolutely your choice. But plan to have that baby. And even plan which sex of baby you should have to that degree. Whether you want a boy child or a girl child, but that's a discussion for another day. But parenting should really be a serious effort. And if you know that a child is expensive, it's more expensive to have a child than to have a car. And parents know this. A child is not just born. A child should be nurtured right up to the time when they are adults. And for government, they should be interested in, yes, is this child surviving? Is the child thriving? And eventually, is this child transforming the society? As long as you're having 1.2 million babies being born in Uganda and dropping out of school, then unfortunately, we are not progressing or taking on the opportunity of the macroeconomists, the discussion that was held earlier, that Uganda's economy is stable. Those were really good words. But eventually, we would like to see those young people who are born, 1.4 million babies being born on a yearly basis, joining school, going to university, and becoming the transformers of our society many years later.
Right.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else wants to take on that issue?
Yeah. Thank you. I'm going to respond to actually all of the questions
Sure, go ahead.
briefly.
Go ahead.
So on what we can do with, in terms of private sector, I'm going to speak more broadly, not just as private sector working in ECE, but as private sector more broadly. I think that you can be part of an effort to engage the big industries, the big employers in the country, formal and informal, to invest in family-friendly policies within their workplace. So that would include things like provision of paid parental leave, paid breastfeeding breaks, access to childcare services, or building a creche or an ECD center or a preschool near your premises. And this has benefits to the employer as well as for the employees. So the benefits to the employer are around less retention, more employee motivation, higher levels of, less attrition, higher levels of retention of people. And then of course the benefits are clear for the employees in terms of, having their children supported in a greater capacity. So I think there really is a lot of potential. We have a lot of big industries in the country, coffee, sugarcane, we have big banks, we have big employers who could take part as part of their corporate social responsibility or, you know, any other efforts that they want to make to support their employees as well as surrounding communities. It sounds very unrealistic maybe, but it's actually very realistic, and it has economic returns to the employers. So I think, Manuela, you're a big advocate in this space. Use your platforms to advocate with other big companies to do the same. I think in terms of there was a question on data, and I just want to flag that in the UDHS 2022, I believe the lady sitting there, you asked a question about the data. The DHS actually provides the ECD index, you know, it provides district level information on how developmentally on track children are in different districts. So there are really some surprises there, and we can make sure that it's circulated and shared with everybody. But it's a source of information that may be useful. And I think parenting, I think a lot was already said on parenting, but parenting, parental support goes hand in hand and is actually a key component of children's development. So ensuring parents have, it's not, it is kind of scientific. There are approaches to dealing with a child's development that are based in developmental psychology, you know, strategies, ways that you can also support yourself so that you can better provide care and support for your children. So there's a lot of information, a lot of great, you know, interventions that have been done. I think it's a matter of, you know, deciding which ones Uganda would like to scale up, you know, rather than having kind of fragmented approach. Are there a few that, you know, government and partners believe are important, and we work together on really making parenting kind of a big point of discussion and something that's directly linked to children's development. Understanding the importance of parenting and children's development, I think not just in Uganda, in many countries, is still, you know, a work in progress, I would say. Thank you. Thank you.
Safina, I have a question for you, and I want you to conclude with it. Let me first hear from Goretti, then you, as people say, you'll come in to summarize. You do that part, so Goretti.
No, thank you very much, Robert, and thank you very much to the ladies who asked questions. Some of them were directed to me. Thanks, Immaculate Nakanjako, my sister, on what can we do. I think for every intervention initiative in education, everybody has a role to play. You asked about what you can do about programming, but I guess you meant that what can everybody do on this important topic. My colleagues have talked about engaging industry, putting in place child-friendly policies in the institutions, but also as private actors, CSOs, or people who live in communities. And this also touches on what Manuela was asking. What can we actually do in our local communities? Even adding to the awareness in communities or parents on the importance of what we are talking about, why it is important to take a child early to school, I think parents will actually respond. So many of them are reluctant, because even government has been saying, not government, some actors in government, they have been saying that, oh, I didn't go to prison learning and so on. And we have been doing some kind of district ranking based on the percentage of children, in each district who are able to read and comprehend and also divide. Maybe it would be nice, something that I'm taking away now that we are working on the next report, some kind of an index on ECD, comparing our findings of 2021 and where we are in 2024. It's something that I'm taking seriously with me. So thank you.
Right. So, Hajati, very quickly, I'll just throw in 3 questions and then you will conclude for us. The first one is, these are questions from people who are online. Online lives matter, so we've got to. So the first one is an update on the new ECD policy and it says the regulation of the centers is not clear. So if you just say something about the regulation of the centers, then there is the question, but you're the government person here, but it's a question of the lack of health care. The personnel are not there. We have trained people, they're not deployed. So the lack of healthcare personnel in remote areas to provide the health services that these children would need. I think the other question the person is asking was about ECD in public schools, and I think that has been extensively addressed. So Hajati, I'll leave that to you to handle as you conclude for everybody.
Thank you very much. I'll begin with responding to a few questions that were asked on the issue of child care centers. The ECCE policy that was recently approved took care of those. That's why it's birth from birth, because we were cognizant that we have child care centers and daycare centers for the below 3 years. And we are advocating that much as we have pre-primary schools, daycare centers should be registered and licensed independently from the pre-primary schools. And the policy, still the policy target is children and their families. That implies that the parents were not forgotten. The same policy is introducing a component on parenting education at the pre-primary schools. At one time, people were asking, do we need to educate parents on how to take care of their children? But when you look in the public, so many parents don't know how to take care of their children. That's why instead of disciplining them positively, even a 3-year is beaten terribly because they don't know how to support them positively. Then the update on the ECCE policy. Currently, we are finalized with developing the ECCE policy implementation standards and guidelines, and immediately we are done, Mama is going to sign off the policy, then we shall begin distributing and disseminating it. On the issue of regulation for ECCE centers, originally we had generic basic requirements and minimum standards. Currently, with support from UNICEF and the government of Uganda, we have developed ECCE-specific basic requirements and minimum standards, and we expect them to guide on the delivery, establishment of pre-primary school. Then on the issue of health care personnel, since we have the PDM under the social services pillar that brings us together, we are trying to mobilize the Ministry of Health to ensure that all health centers have facilities to manage, although they have trained VHTs, and these are the people within the community to support the health personnel on areas of ECD. The one for ECD at public primary school, we have deliberated a lot on that throughout the discussion. Thank you.
Right, so now that we have sorted out the online lives, well, I was brought here, so I might as well put in a couple of points of my own. I actually think that for this ECD conversation to be complete, I think somewhere between the Ministry of Gender, something, Education, UNICEF, World Bank, all those big people with a lot of money, can we have a discussion about the parenting crisis? Because that pillar is going to affect, and here's why. There are whole communities that were affected by conflict and whose parenting skills are completely absent. The society broke down. Rapid urbanization means that the institutions we used to have that would help people with parenting skills are non-existent. There is the question of labor migration. So I think that's now, parenting is now ripe enough as a subject of discussion as part of this broader ECD issue. I am offering myself as a panelist. When you tell me the location and the I will be present. I can mobilize a powerful audience so that, but I think that this is important enough. Otherwise, this subject is standing on its own if it's just looking at resources and education and health. It needs to look at the people who are bringing the children forth, whether they are competent and capable. I keep telling my son that yes, he's of age now, he can be a father, but he's not yet ready to be a parent. So his other behavior elsewhere must take into account the fact that he should not start a family yet, because there's still some. So, on that note, on your way out, you will get a coupon which will allow you to a sumptuous lunch at Addis. The guys online, you will have to cater for yourselves because you didn't come here, so you will have to go and find lunch of your own. So please make sure you get, we're not leaving yet. I'm just giving you advance notice of the things that are supposed to happen, because after this, my role here ends and I revert to growing coffee. I came to speak English, which I have done sufficiently well, so you clap for me. Please clap for my panel. I think you are better off than before they went on stage, so thank you guys. You can now step down. What I will do now is invite Moses Osiru on education from World Bank, who will then invite the most senior official who is here. I don't want to introduce him because I have another life with him. I might use titles which might confuse people, but you will invite Robert Okudi from Ministry of Education to wind up. As for me, thank you very much for the opportunity of being here. We'll see you at lunchtime.
Good afternoon. It looks like, Robert, if I may use that name, that our heights are not exactly the same. Allow me to, I think this is a difficult task I have, because we had two sessions. One earlier that focused more broadly on economic issues, and this second one that integrated that with ECD. But let me proceed. And my understanding initially was that, Robert, you would continue with the task until it is finished, but we'll see when it comes to that. So let me start by saying that the World Bank, and of course, our divisional director who left and country manager who left, would like to sincerely thank all of you for your valuable contributions to this 24th edition of the Uganda Economic Update. As the country manager highlighted, the UEU aims to inform policymakers, stakeholders on the performance of the economy, but it specifically combines the analysis as well as international best practices with our experience through this type of dialogue that we've just been taking part in. From this morning, our country director highlighted a few elements, and I'll try not to change the wording too much. He highlighted that Uganda's economy continues to show strength. It is marked by low inflation, favorable agricultural production, and robust industrial and services activity. It is driven by next exports. Now, the anticipated growth that has been driven by the commencement of oil production is promising. However, potential delays are posing significant downside risks and highlight the need to prepare for this. At this point, just to highlight that the report highlighted that revenue generated could represent, this is from oil, could represent close to 5% of GDP, that would cover a significant portion of the country's budget deficit. But also in the panel, there was a highlight about the need to be aware of the Dutch disease. I'll leave it at that. So despite facing tight external financial conditions, Uganda's macroeconomic environment remains stable. Inflation has receded, and the numbers were put there. It has gone down to 3.2% this last FY versus 8.8% previously. And fiscal deficits have narrowed, with the Uganda shilling and public debt to GDP ratio maintaining stability. However, it remains vulnerable to significant risks. Again, the panel highlighted a few. One of them was around coffee production. Again, we come back to our farmer. I'm not sure, I don't think he's smallholder anymore, Robert. But the new EU law was highlighted, which of course requires that they want to ensure that there are no implications from coffee production on the reduction of forests. And this law will kick in 2025-2026, which will impact smallholder farmers and others. But also, I think in Silva's presentation, he highlighted the issues of supply chain risks. And he put, I think, one of the issues was around the escalation of conflicts in the Middle East, where a lot of our exports currently go. So challenges also persist, including elevated debt servicing costs, and also to highlight that too little is spent on human capital development. And again, the figures were put there, 2.7% of GDP for Uganda is spending versus international benchmarks of 4%. We saw some countries at 5.1%. I think it's Ethiopia at 5.1% of GDP. So two questions were asked and answered. One is, how do we find the money to support quality human capital development? And I remind us of 3 points. One, there is need to continue fiscal consolidation, but also strategic borrowing to support high priority development areas. And I think the representative from Ministry of Finance highlighted that they are currently repurposing the budget to productive sectors as part of that effort. The second is that domestic resource mobilization is low, so it's at 13.7%, but that is not enough. That there is need also to do more than just enhance DRM. So that is also to need to have policies in place, but also to identify and eliminate wasteful expenditures. A point was raised around Auditor General reports, which are consistently available and need to be used more frequently and often, but also to enhance export diversification, which is again around the issues of the Dutch disease, to ensure that we plan for the windfall that might come from successful oil production. The second question was around, so the third point was that we need to remain positive. I think that was highlighted a number of times, and the need to remain positive in this discussion. So the second question was, how can the economy create more and inclusive jobs? That was discussed, but again, I'm not going to go further into that, but move to the second part of the report, where again, the keynote highlighted that international experience demonstrates that human capital accounts for up to 50% of differences in cross-country income, as well as growth rate differences. So that highlighted the importance of investing in human capacity, and the area of ECD was highlighted as crucial for harnessing our demographic opportunity and driving long-term prosperity. So the high returns on investments in pre-primary highlight significant potential benefits, while the cost of inaction, on the flip side, remain substantial. So 5 points I highlight here from this discussion. One is that most physical brain development takes place during the first 1,000 days of a child's life, and importantly, it starts in the womb. Secondly, there is need for essential nutrition, quality health care, stimulation, as well as education. Thirdly, investing in ECD is more cost-effective than attempting to make up for missed opportunities later. And within this point, we highlight the need for action. I think the Minister of Education representative highlighted the opportunity in PDM for ECD and talked about specifically the social services pillar, which is already advocating for an ECD center at village level versus, of course, you know, primary schools are at the parish level. So this even goes beyond that. Secondly, that government should incentivize opportunities for the private sector. So including looking at how to make it more affordable in terms of providing ECD services. The fourth point, that there's a risk of poor quality ECD in itself may be more damaging than providing no services at all. So it should be that we ensure that if we do go for it, we need to go for it properly in a quality way. And then the last point is around the important role for parents. Now, unfortunately, my 4 kids are already gone beyond the point of ECD. So what I'm learning today, I can't put into practice. But again, 3 things were highlighted. One, the parenting crisis. We also talked about, and I think the facilitator highlighted these also, parenting education and also parenting skills, all which are critical elements to consider. So as I conclude to say that we reaffirm, I believe we reaffirm the commitment to implement effective policies and reforms to enhance human capital development and economic resilience. And then lastly, we do encourage all of you to continue collaborating with us to address these challenges and to capitalize on opportunities for greater and faster economic growth. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir.
Okay, so a reminder that the debate continues. The debate continues tonight at 8 p.m. And all you have to do is go on X, find my address. It's just very simple. It's at @rkabshenga. Bill, now you get to learn how to pronounce my name. At @rkabshenga. It's very simple. The details are there. I'll log on at 7:45. You'll find a purple ring around it. If you've never done X Spaces before, you just click on it and it will let you in. So I run a small radio station there that's completely unregulated. So we get to be completely wild. So please follow the debate on that point. You will have more time for debate and whatever you may want to listen to and answer. And on that note, let me invite Mr. Robert Okudi to close, and then we will go for lunch from here.
Thank you, Robert. You'll not be able to see my photo or my name up there. I'm just filling in the program. Robert has been talking about the extracurricular activity that we're involved in. It emphasizes nutrition at the right time and the right nutrition. So I'll try to make sure that I don't keep you any longer here. Mine is mostly just to thank you so much, especially the World Bank, for bringing this debate to the fore. You have acted as advocacy for the Ministry of Education and for the education sector to demonstrate that early childhood development makes sense, makes economic sense, makes social sense. William gave a challenge that, you see, in order for you to attract additional resources, you have to demonstrate the relationship between ECD and economic growth. For a very long time, this has not been possible. Because, you see, government policy up to now is that we do not finance pre-primary education, even when we know that some of our learners are actually within the bracket of ECD. I wish to thank the presenters who were before us today and the panelists. They have really done a very good job. The Ministry of Education is the coordinator for the Human Capital Development Secretariat and the program as a whole. And next week, we shall be convening all the planners in the value chain. That is Ministry of Education, Ministry of Health, Ministry responsible for community development, and Ministry responsible for water. So that we receive this report and see how we can pick the low-hanging fruits. So the planners within those ministries will be convening so that we hit the iron when it's still hot. The theme of this economic update is very, very timely. Because, again, as William had said, evidence. We have been trying to present evidence over time, but I think it's an opportune moment at this point. One, you all know that we had a census last year, and it has brought out very many salient issues that can enable us to demonstrate the population structure of the country and how this impacts on provision of education, provision of health, provision of water, and then community development. So this is very, very key. We have also had the NDP being reviewed. And next year, next financial year, we have an opportunity of including these interventions for the next 5 years. So this is a very, very big opportunity to us. And within the next few months, I believe that the NDP will be launched because it's currently in Parliament being finalized, and soon NPA will be able to launch it as a planning framework for the next financial year and the next 5 years up to 2030. The other one is National Assessment of Progress in Education, which tries to assess the level of competence of learners in P3 and P6. We released the report last year, and it showed us how we are regressing on many indicators. So this is an opportunity as well. A mention was made about the Education Policy Review Commission report, which came out and also recommends that the formative years of a child need to be harnessed if we expect to get quality human capital in this country. So those are some of the areas, some of the evidence that has been adduced that we are going to put together to ensure that first we start with the low-hanging fruits, and then secondly, the Minister of Finance was here. We feel that it will be possible for us to advocate for more investment in early childhood development. Now, I believe with those few words, I wish to thank all of us for participating in today's discussion. The ministry, the program of human capital development is ready to push forward this agenda. And we shall start immediately. Next week, we are going to convene a meeting of the planners. We shall invite UNICEF, we shall invite the bank, and then eventually we shall invite you to contribute to the future planning and programming of early childhood development in our budgets. Thank you so much. I wish you a good afternoon.
Lunch is served. Get a coupon. Walk out at the end of the corridor where the red carpet ends. You'll see at this room on your left. That's where the lunch is. Thank you.